Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity settles in softly and science hums quietly beside you like a companion in the dark. Tonight's slow and thoughtful journey begins with a question that's as old as imagination itself, and maybe as deep as the soil beneath your feet. What if we're not the first? Not the first civilization, not the first to build, to wonder, to destroy, to rebuild? What if we are what the first civilization left behind? The scattered echo of something ancient, remembered not through ruins or relics, but through the faint pattern of life learning itself again. It sounds a little wild at first, doesn't it? A story fit for myths or science fiction, the kind you hear whispered late at night when the mind is still half awake and the world feels older than it looks. But it's worth asking, even gently, because Earth is a place that forgets well, and sometimes what's forgotten tells more about who we are than what's remembered. Before we wander too far into that idea, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're under city lights, maybe somewhere quiet where the only glow is from the screen and the sky. And what time is it there, in your own little corner of the present? Strange, isn't it, to think that somewhere, someone else is listening to the same words, but in another hour, another day. We're all scattered across the timeline, yet here together, in this small shared moment of curiosity. If you find these late-night musings soothing, or if this blend of calm and science helps your thoughts unwind, I'd be grateful if you'd give the video a like, maybe even subscribe. It helps this small pocket of quiet reach others who might need it too. Now, let's slow down and let the idea breathe a little. What if humanity, for all its pride in being the latest chapter of creation, is actually a sequel? Not a beginning, but a continuation. Not the first flame, but the ember that caught again after a long silence. If there was a civilization before ours, one so ancient that even the rocks have forgotten its name, what would remain of it now? It's easy to assume we'd know if that were true. We think of fossils, of ruins, of tools half buried in dust. We imagine massive cities swallowed by forests or oceans, waiting for us to stumble upon them. But Earth, ever patient and restless, doesn't keep records the way we wish it did. Over millions of years, continents drift. Mountains rise, ice grinds, seas flood and retreat. What was once land becomes ocean floor. What was once civilization becomes sediment. The surface of the planet is a living palimpsest, writing and rewriting itself endlessly. If another civilization lived here tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, it might be gone not because it was small, but because time is efficient at erasing. Consider this. The oldest known human structures, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, are around 12,000 years old. To us, that feels impossibly ancient. But compared to the Earth's history, it's a heartbeat. 12,000 years is barely visible on the geological calendar. If a civilization existed even 10 million years ago, a blink in planetary time, almost every trace of it would be gone. Rocks would have weathered, mountains would have shifted, the ocean would have folded and unfolded over continents like a slow tide. Scientists have wondered about this, not as fantasy, but as a serious curiosity sometimes called the Silurian hypothesis, after a fictional intelligent species imagined in an old science fiction series. The idea is simple. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth long before humans, could we detect it now? The honest answer is maybe, but probably not easily. Most of our materials, from metals to plastics, decay or get subducted into the crust over millions of years. Even the grandest skyscrapers and deepest mines would eventually vanish. What would remain, perhaps, is chemical. A brief anomaly in the sediment record, a spike in carbon, traces of synthetic molecules, subtle disruptions in isotope ratios. Tiny fingerprints of a species that once altered its atmosphere, much as we're doing now. In that sense, we might not just be wondering about another civilization's traces, We might be leaving our own for some future beings to find, long after we're gone, and they might ask the same question. What if we are what the last civilization left behind? It's strange to think that evidence of ourselves might not be monuments or machines, but a thin, dirty line in the geological layers, a whisper of altered climate, a residue of industry, not a statue, but a chemical scar. Yet that's how time works here. It doesn't favour stories or cities. It remembers in minerals and molecules. Imagine the Earth as a kind of cautious archivist. It keeps only what it can press flat and bury deep. A mountain of knowledge reduced to a trace of colour in stone. If you wanted to hide an entire civilization, you couldn't do better than to let it vanish naturally through the patient churn of tectonic plates. And if one day, far in the future, a new intelligent species digs through the layers, they might find just enough to wonder about us. Not who we were, but what we were made of. There's something humbling in that. We like to think of ourselves as the centre of the story, the culmination of evolution, the first to truly see and measure and understand. But maybe we're part of a much older rhythm, life reaching complexity, collapsing, then starting over again in new forms. Civilizations might rise not just once, but many times, each one rediscovering fire, mathematics, language, memory, and loss. Each one convinced it's the first to do so. It's not such an impossible idea when you consider how life adapts. The planet has been home to countless transformations. Long before us, there were forests of giant ferns taller than houses, dragonflies with wingspans like eagles, reptiles that ruled for hundreds of millions of years. Then, in one geological instant, they vanished. Not all at once, but swiftly enough that only fragments of their existence remain for us to find. If such dominance can disappear almost overnight in planetary terms, why not a civilization too? We sometimes think intelligence is a recent phenomenon, as if consciousness appeared suddenly when humans did. But nature has experimented with complexity for billions of years. Octopuses solve puzzles. Dolphins recognize themselves. Birds plan for the future. Evolution doesn't climb a ladder toward intelligence. It meanders, trying paths that may bloom for a while and then fade. Somewhere in those ancient ages, might there have been a path that led farther than we know, far enough to build, to think, to leave a mark that time has since erased? Our planet is 4.5 billion years old. For most of that time it's been busy. Continents have collided, volcanoes have rebuilt the land, meteorites have reset the surface more than once. The oldest ocean crust we can still study is only about 200 million years old. Everything older than that has been recycled into the mantle. So if there was a civilization before that, say 300 million years ago, there would be no surface record left. Even fossils that old are rare, fragile survivors of a deep and constant renewal. And yet, we sometimes find things that make us pause. An iron sphere embedded in 3 billion-year-old rock, microscopic metallic spirals found in ancient sediments, patterns that might be natural or might be something else. Scientists, careful and skeptical by nature, almost always find explanations in geology or chemistry, and most likely they're right. Nature can produce remarkable complexity all on its own. But that's part of the fascination. The possibility that the Earth itself might hide traces too subtle for us to recognise. Remnants of intelligence disguised as accident. Even if we never find anything, the thought alone reshapes how we see ourselves. It reminds us that civilizations are temporary arrangements in a long story of matter and energy. We build, we record, we try to leave traces, but in the end, time reclaims everything. The question isn't whether there was another before us. The question is whether anything ever truly lasts long enough to prove it. If we could look at Earth not as it is now, but as it was across the ages, if we could watch the continents shift in accelerated time, the oceans fill and empty, the ice advance and retreat, we'd see a pattern of forgetting. Every few 100 million years, the surface renews, mountains become dust, rivers carve new paths, life experiments and resets. The slate clears itself. In that light, the idea that we might be a distant echo of something older feels less like fantasy and more like probability. And perhaps we'd see ourselves differently too. Not as the pinnacle of creation, but as one phase in a recurring experiment. Matter learning to think, to reflect, to build symbols, to question its own origins. The universe may not care about civilizations, but it seems fond of producing them. Stars form, die, and scatter their elements. Those elements form worlds. Worlds grow life. Life builds intelligence. Intelligence builds stories. And when it ends, it leaves just enough raw material for the next beginning. When you hold that in mind, the silence of prehistory feels less empty. The absence of evidence becomes part of the rhythm. Maybe there was someone before us, and maybe their greatest contribution wasn't what they built, but what they left for us to inherit. The conditions, the chemistry, the biological complexity that made our own rise possible. Perhaps humanity isn't a separate act, but a continuation of a pattern that has played out many times, each version refining the last. It's easy to wonder what they might have looked like, what language they spoke, what they believed. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the answer isn't in their form or their culture, but in us. We might be the outcome of their long fading, the residue of their genes, their mistakes, their triumphs folded into our biology. We might be the memory of something that learned, long before we did, that intelligence isn't permanent, that survival requires humility before time. The thought isn't meant to unsettle, though it does tilt the imagination. It suggests that existence is continuous, even if memory isn't. That consciousness might be less like a light switched on once, and more like a flame passed quietly from one age to another, each time in a new vessel. What we call humanity could be the latest bearer of that flame, unaware of the hands that held it first, but guided by its warmth all the same. As you sit here listening, you might notice that even the idea of before us feels slippery. We measure history in thousands of years, archaeology in millions, geology in billions. But to the Earth, it's all one slow unfolding. Civilizations might come and go like seasons, each one convinced it is new, unique, alone, each one leaving traces too faint for the next to find. And yet, through that cycle, something accumulates. Not physical evidence, but potential. The readiness of the world to host thought again, to build language again, to look at the stars and wonder what came before. In that sense, we might be what the first civilization left behind, not in ruins or relics, but in readiness. A planet shaped, refined, made fertile for intelligence. A system that learned through trial how to create minds that could ask questions like this one. Perhaps the first civilization wasn't human, or even biological in the way we know it. Perhaps it was a network of life, a harmony of forms that reached understanding and then dissolved, leaving behind an Earth better prepared for the next emergence. Some scientists suggest that intelligence is a convergent trait, that given enough time, evolution tends toward complexity. Eyes evolved multiple times independently. Flight did too. If consciousness follows the same rule, then it's not rare, it's inevitable. The universe keeps trying until it gets it right, or at least interesting. Maybe that's what happened here. One civilization rose, fell, and the residue of its existence shaped the path for the next. A genetic echo, not a cultural one. We might carry their essence not in stories, but in instincts. In our fascination with tools, our urge to explore, our restlessness with what we already know. It's a quiet thought, but a powerful one, that even extinction might be a kind of seed, that what ends doesn't truly vanish, it just transforms, and that what we are now could be the afterlife of something that once dreamed just as we do. As we move forward, we can let that idea settle gently. The notion that the ground beneath us isn't just earth and stone, but memory. That humanity might not be the beginning of civilization, but its latest form, a continuation of something older, patient and persistent, surviving through cycles of forgetting and rediscovery. The dust remembers more than we think, and if we listen closely, perhaps it's still whispering. The thought lingers, doesn't it? That maybe we're not the first. It sits quietly at the edge of the mind, not demanding belief, just curiosity. The kind that makes you tilt your head a little and wonder what might be hidden behind the long curtain of time. For most of history, humans have been so busy trying to survive, build and understand the present that we rarely stop to ask the simplest question of all. Not how life began, or when, or why, but whether it began here more than once. Whether we are the first to walk upright, think in symbols and ask questions about our own beginnings, or whether we are simply the ones who happen to do it this time around. That, in essence, is the forgotten question. It's strange that we don't ask it more often. We explore the stars and scan the skies for intelligent life, sending signals into the vast unknown, hoping for a reply. We listen for whispers from alien worlds, yet seldom consider that the echo we seek might come from our own past. We imagine civilizations light years away, but overlook the possibility that one might have existed right here, long before we arrived. Maybe the silence we hear from space isn't because intelligence is rare, but because it is fragile. Because even when it blooms, it doesn't last. That silence, though, isn't empty. It's filled with the hum of deep time. Every grain of sand, every layer of rock, every fossilized shell is a syllable in a language the Earth has been speaking for billions of years. But like any language, it only tells us what we are able to understand. Most of the conversation is missing, eroded, rewritten, or simply too old to survive. If another civilization existed hundreds of millions of years ago, its words would have long since faded from the record. All we'd have are hints, strange alignments, geological coincidences, and the faint feeling that something doesn't quite add up. Humans, by nature, fill gaps with stories. We've done it since the beginning. When there was thunder, we imagined gods. When there was darkness, we imagined monsters. When we find something mysterious in stone, we invent a story to fit it. That's not foolishness, it's pattern-seeking, the same ability that lets us build science and art alike. But sometimes the patterns we glimpse hint at something more persistent than imagination. Myths across the world speak of great floods, of lost lands swallowed by the sea, of civilizations that rose and fell long before recorded history. These stories, told by cultures far apart, share remarkable similarities. Perhaps they're just reflections of natural disasters that scarred collective memory. Or perhaps they're fragments of something older, passed down imperfectly across generations. A whisper of real events blurred by time into legend. You might have heard of Atlantis, or Lemuria, or the many other mythical lost continents said to have vanished beneath the waves. Most historians treat them as allegories, metaphors for hubris, or cautionary tales about change. And yet, the persistence of these myths in every corner of the world is curious. Civilizations as far apart as Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica and Polynesia tell versions of the same story. A golden age, a catastrophe, a loss. It could be coincidence. It could be a shared human tendency to explain ruin through narrative. Or it could be memory, long and distorted, of something that really happened, deep in prehistory, when the world itself looked different. But here's the challenge. Human memory is short. Even written language, one of our proudest achievements, has only existed for about 5,000 years. Beyond that, we rely on artifacts, bones, and layers of soil to tell the story. Yet the Earth's memory stretches back nearly 1 million times longer. The vast majority of its history is pre-human, unwritten, unknown. Our understanding of it is like reading a novel where almost every page has been torn out, and the few that remain are burned around the edges. We piece together meaning from what's left, but the context is missing. When geologists talk about the deep past, they use a word that's both poetic and precise: eons. The Phanerozoic eon, the one that includes all complex life forms we know of, stretches back about 540 million years. Before that lies an even greater expanse, the Precambrian, nearly 4 billion years long. Within that silent darkness, single-celled life dominated, occasionally experimenting with complexity, then retreating. It's an unimaginably long time for a planet to be practicing life before reaching anything like us. Given that scale, the idea that intelligence only appeared once feels statistically improbable. It's like tossing a coin 1 billion times and expecting it to land on the same side every single time. If Earth is capable of producing sentient, tool-using beings, it might have done so more than once. And if it did, we might never know. The fossil record favours bones, shells, and hard parts. A civilization like ours, made of metal, concrete, and circuitry, would vanish into dust within a few million years. Even the oldest known rocks on the surface today are just fragments of a story still being rewritten beneath our feet. So why don't we look for them? Why is the idea of an earlier intelligence considered so unlikely that it rarely enters scientific conversation? Partly because science, as a discipline, deals in evidence. It needs data, not possibilities. And when you're working with a planet that constantly recycles its crust, evidence is the first thing to disappear. But there's another reason, one that's more psychological. We like being first. It gives us meaning. To imagine that we might just be a continuation of something else unsettles our sense of uniqueness. It's a quiet challenge to the narrative we've built about human progress, from stone tools to space flight, from fire to fusion, all seemingly in one grand linear ascent. If we discovered proof of a civilization that came before us, it wouldn't just rewrite history books, it would rewrite philosophy. It would mean that progress isn't a straight line, but a circle. That intelligence isn't a one-time event, but a recurring phenomenon, and that the Earth is not our inheritance alone, but a shared home, used and renewed many times before. Still, even without physical proof, there are traces worth examining. Not in artifacts, but in patterns of thought. Across ancient cultures, there are sudden leaps in architecture, astronomy, mathematics, that seem to appear fully formed. The Sumerians, for example, developed writing, agriculture, and complex law codes with remarkable speed. The Egyptians built on a scale that even today puzzles engineers. The Indus Valley civilization had urban planning, sewage systems, and standardized weights. Each of these appears to emerge abruptly in the archaeological record, as if sparked by some unseen inspiration. We explain it as convergence, the natural evolution of human ingenuity. But sometimes it feels as if these bursts of innovation were guided by echoes of something older, remembered not in words, but in instincts. Think of how knowledge persists even when memory fades. A musician can hum a melody they've never heard before because the brain invents, within constraints it barely understands. Civilizations might work the same way. Perhaps we carry in our collective subconscious the residue of an earlier intelligence, not direct knowledge, but a subtle orientation toward discovery, a tendency to rebuild what once existed, even without knowing it. Some philosophers call this morphic resonance, others simply cultural inheritance. Whatever the term, the idea is the same, that information, patterns, even ideas, can linger in the collective field of life itself. If the first civilization existed, maybe its thoughts never fully vanished. Maybe they're woven into the same biological code that gives us curiosity, invention, and the unending drive to ask why. And yet, it's worth remembering how easily memory fades. When an empire falls, its language often dies within a generation. Its stories survive only as myth. Its buildings crumble into anonymous stone. Multiply that by millions of years, and even the grandest civilization would leave little behind. It's not that we've found no traces, it's that we've forgotten how to recognize them. Consider coal. the compressed remains of ancient forests. We burn it for energy, turning long-dead life into heat and motion. But what if some of those layers we dig through once contained more than trees? What if, in the incomprehensible stretch of prehistory, nature compressed not just plants, but the debris of an earlier industrial age? It sounds far-fetched, but the question is worth holding. Every resource we use, every mineral we mine, might be both a product and a witness of civilizations past. You could say the Earth is a master of erasure. It's been doing it for billions of years. Volcanoes rewrite continents, glaciers sculpt valleys, meteors reset ecosystems. Life recovers, adapts, and carries on. But the slate never stays blank for long. The forgotten question, are we the first, or merely the latest, is hidden not just in rocks, but in patterns that repeat. Each extinction event clears space for something new, and each resurgence seems to bring life back with greater complexity. Intelligence might just be one of those recurring blooms, arising whenever the conditions are right. If that's true, then what we call human civilization might not be the first to reach this level of awareness, only the first to survive long enough to ask about it. Perhaps others reached similar heights, but didn't make it through the next cataclysm. A solar flare, a supervolcano, a sudden ice age. Any of these could erase a species in a geological instant, and after a few million years, there'd be nothing left to find. There's a kind of quiet comfort in that, oddly enough. It means that life is persistent, even if civilizations aren't. It means that intelligence, in whatever form it takes, keeps finding its way back into existence, like grass pushing through cracks in the pavement. Maybe we're not alone in the cosmic sense, but we're also not alone in time. We're part of a lineage that spans not just generations, but epochs. Of course, there's a humbling side to that thought too. If others came before and fell, it means we might too. The forgotten question isn't just about the past, but the future. If intelligence keeps arising, it also keeps ending. There's something sobering about realizing that survival may not be guaranteed, that even the most advanced species can be undone by its own inventions or by the indifference of the planet it inhabits. Maybe that's the real message hidden in the Earth's silence, not that there were others, but that their absence is a warning. Every civilization believes it's permanent, every species assumes it's the final act, but the rocks tell a different story, of endless renewal, of creation and erasure in equal measure. When you think about it that way, even the question itself becomes a kind of inheritance. To ask whether we are what the first civilization left behind is to recognize our fragility and our continuity all at once. It's a reminder that knowledge and existence are borrowed things, temporary and shared. We are living on a world that has seen more beginnings and endings than we can imagine, and we are one more layer being written into that ongoing record. The forgotten question then isn't just, were there others before us? It's also, what will remain of us? When the layers settle, when the oceans rise and fall again, when the continents rearrange themselves, what traces will we leave? Will the next intelligence, however many millions of years from now, wonder the same way we do? Will they dig into the Earth and find a thin, strange layer full of plastics, metals and isotopes, and wonder what kind of beings made it? The cycle will continue, as it always does. Curiosity will return in new forms, new species, new minds, and they too will ask questions that echo ours, perhaps without realizing they're asking the same ones that were whispered by others long before them. That's the quiet beauty of it. Knowledge isn't owned, it's rediscovered, reshaped, remembered. And so we drift, for now, suspended between knowing and not knowing, between pride in our progress and humility before time. The forgotten question remains unanswered, but that might be the point. Some questions aren't meant to be solved, only carried forward, like lanterns through the dark, lighting the path for whoever comes next. The Earth doesn't hurry to reveal its secrets, and perhaps that's why the mystery endures. Somewhere beneath our feet, beneath the shifting layers of stone and memory, there might be traces of stories older than imagination itself. Whether or not we ever find them, the possibility changes how we see everything, not as the end of a journey, but as a moment in an unbroken chain of civilizations, each one leaving behind just enough wonder for the next to begin again. And if you listen closely, even now there's a stillness in the night that feels almost like recognition, as if the world itself remembers, even when we don't. When you pause to think about it, the ground beneath you is more than just soil and stone. It's history layered upon itself, pressed and folded into quiet memory. Every grain of sand, every vein of rock, every fossilized fragment of something that once lived is part of a vast archive that the Earth has been keeping since before there were eyes to read it. We walk across these layers every day, rarely noticing that we're treading on pages of a book too immense to finish, one that has been rewritten countless times by wind, fire and water. And like any well-used manuscript, most of the older chapters have faded beyond recognition. If we could see through the crust of the planet, if we could peel it back layer by layer, the view would be overwhelming. The surface would not look like a single world, but like thousands of worlds stacked upon one another. Ancient oceans turned to limestone, forests compressed into coal, deserts hardened into sandstone. Some layers whisper of calm seas, others scream of cataclysm. Buried volcanic ash marks days when the sky went dark. Thin seams of soot record the aftermath of impacts that ended entire eras of life. And somewhere in between there might be traces of something less obvious, something delicate. The faintest residues of civilizations erased so completely that all we have left are questions. The Earth doesn't preserve everything evenly. Some moments vanish almost instantly. Others linger for hundreds of millions of years. What survives depends on chance, on where it happened, how it ended, and what followed. Most of the land we stand on today didn't even exist when dinosaurs walked the Earth. The crust beneath our cities is constantly moving, carried by tectonic plates that drift like enormous rafts across the molten mantle. Over enough time, those plates collide, dive beneath one another, and are recycled. Mountains rise, wear down, and return to the deep. Oceans open and close. Continents break apart and reunite. Every few 100 million years, the planet rearranges itself entirely. That's the first, and perhaps the most humbling thing about the layers beneath our feet. They are temporary. Even rock, which feels eternal to us, is part of a slow-breathing cycle. What we call solid ground is, in geological terms, just a momentary pause in motion. So if a civilization had built its cities here tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, it's entirely possible that the crust it stood on no longer exists. Its ruins might have melted back into magma, resurfaced as volcanic rock, or been buried miles deep under younger formations. In that sense, the Earth isn't hiding its past civilizations from us. It has simply reused the same canvas. When archaeologists study human history, they deal in thousands of years. When geologists study the planet, they deal in millions. That difference changes everything. 1,000 years might erase a wooden house. 1,000,000 can erase a mountain. At that scale, even steel and concrete dissolve into minerals and dust. The traces of our modern world, the skyscrapers, the highways, the satellites, would be gone long before the next great reshuffling of continents. What would remain would be microscopic, chemical, geological. A thin layer of anomalies telling a story only another species with science and patience could decode. You can see how thorough time is by looking at what little it spares. Fossils, for instance, are not common. They form only under very specific conditions. Rapid burial, lack of oxygen, the right minerals in the groundwater. Most living things leave no trace at all. If you gathered all the species that have ever existed, less than 1% have been fossilized, and even fewer have been found. Entire lineages have disappeared without leaving a single recognizable mark. Civilization, compared to biology, is even more fragile. Its remains are concentrated in narrow bands of rock, a few meters thick at most, representing a blink in the geological record. Sometimes when geologists drill deep into the Earth, they pull up cores that stretch across eons. Each colour, each texture, each tiny variation in composition represents a different environment. Shallow seas, deserts, volcanic plains, glacial periods. In those columns of stone, the story of the planet unfolds like a slow film. But between the recognisable patterns there are gaps. Sections where sediment was eroded away, where entire ages are missing. These gaps, called unconformities, are reminders of how incomplete the record really is. Whole epochs can vanish without a trace. If a civilization existed during one of those erased intervals, we'd never know. There's something quietly eerie about that. We assume the past is buried, waiting to be found. But much of it isn't buried at all. It's gone, transformed into something else. The granite beneath your home might once have been ocean floor. The sand under your feet might have been part of a mountain that no longer exists. The line between past and present is blurred beyond recognition. The Earth is both the storyteller and the editor, preserving only what suits its rhythm. Sometimes, though, it leaves hints that are difficult to interpret. Scientists studying ancient climate records have found peculiar chemical signatures, sudden spikes in carbon dioxide, traces of synthetic-looking isotopes, unexplained warming events. Most can be explained through natural causes, volcanic eruptions, methane releases, asteroid impacts. But every now and then, the data feels uncomfortably familiar. Patterns that mirror our own industrial footprint appear in rocks tens of millions of years old. It's almost as if the planet has seen this kind of disturbance before, endured it, and then quietly reset. No one is suggesting that was caused by an earlier intelligent species. Natural processes can mimic many of the same effects, but still, the resemblance is unsettling. It raises the question of how we would appear to someone studying our age millions of years from now. Would they mistake our carbon emissions for a volcanic event? Would they notice the traces of synthetic chemicals that nature never made? Would they wonder, as we do now, whether such signals could come from a civilization? The layers beneath their feet might tell them a story they can only partly understand. A story about beings who changed the world and then disappeared. It's easy to think of those layers as a record of destruction, but they also tell a story of resilience. Each extinction, each upheaval, each period of chaos is followed by renewal. Life finds its way back, adapting to whatever the planet becomes next. In that sense, the Earth is less a graveyard than a teacher. It erases not out of malice, but out of necessity. It clears space for new possibilities. If a previous civilization existed, perhaps it too was part of that cycle. A lesson in impermanence, a step in the long experiment of consciousness. Even the landscapes we see as stable are in motion. The Himalayas, for example, are still rising, pushed upward by the slow collision of India and Asia. The Atlantic Ocean is widening by a few centimetres each year as magma wells up from the mid-ocean ridge. In 100 million years, new mountains will stand where seas once were, and new seas will flood where mountains stand now. The outlines of our continents, the ones we learned in school and see on maps, are just one temporary arrangement among countless others. Each version of the Earth has its own ecosystems, its own climates, its own stories. When you think about it, this constant reshaping makes the search for an ancient civilization almost impossible. We're looking for footprints on a beach that has been washed away and rebuilt 1,000 times. The sand may still be there, but the patterns are gone. Even so, people keep looking. Not because they expect to find a lost city of stone and metal, but because the search itself reminds us how brief our presence really is. To dig into the Earth is to confront time in its most physical form. Some researchers, more playful than dogmatic, have wondered what a truly ancient civilization would leave behind if it wanted to be remembered. Would it bury messages in stable mineral formations, encode information in DNA, leave self-replicating machines designed to awaken when conditions were right again? So far, we've found nothing that fits. But the absence of evidence is also what makes the idea haunting. It means that if they did exist, they understood impermanence far better than we do. They built knowing the planet would outlast them, that everything made of matter would eventually return to dust. We, on the other hand, build as if the world will stay as it is forever. Our cities are designed for decades, maybe centuries, but not for millennia. The layers beneath future feet will tell a different story, one of plastic fibres embedded in rock, of radioactive isotopes from energy experiments, of metals alloyed in ways nature never invented. Those will be our fossils, and perhaps one day someone will study them and try to imagine what kind of beings left them there. It's strange to realise that in a sense we're already becoming part of the geological record. The Anthropocene, as scientists call it, is a proposed new epoch marked by human influence on the planet. Future geologists, or whoever takes their place, will be able to identify our time by a distinctive layer of synthetic materials and chemical shifts. It's a small, bright scar in an otherwise slow and natural history. For all our complexity, that might be the only lasting trace we leave. Still, there's something poetic in knowing that we too will be part of those layers, pressed into stone, folded into the next story the Earth decides to tell. Maybe every civilization leaves a trace, however small, a subtle change in the rhythm of the planet. Ours will join the others, real or imagined, as one more pattern in the endless experiment of life. When you look at the ground with that in mind, even ordinary soil feels different. The dirt under your fingernails, the gravel on a path, the stones at the edge of a river, they've all been something else before. Lava, coral, dust from a distant desert. The minerals that make up a pebble in your hand might have been part of a mountain older than life itself. The calcium in your bones could once have been part of a shell in a prehistoric sea. The elements that make up your body were forged in stars that lived and died long before the Earth was born. Everything beneath us and within us is recycled. There is no beginning, only transformation, and that brings the question full circle. If everything recycles, if the planet forgets and begins again endlessly, then perhaps civilization does too. Maybe intelligence is not a unique event, but a recurring layer. Thin, bright, and brief. Each time it appears, it changes the world a little, adds a new ingredient, a new possibility. Over billions of years, those small contributions might accumulate, shaping the conditions for the next emergence. What we call progress might simply be memory resurfacing in a different form. It's humbling to think that the Earth beneath us isn't just history, it's a mirror. It shows us what we are and what we will become. Dust, stone, sediment, layer upon layer, carrying the faint echo of everything that came before. The forgotten civilizations, if they existed, are not lost in some unreachable realm. They are here, underfoot, dissolved into the same minerals that support our own cities. We're walking on their remnants, breathing their recycled air, drinking their ancient water. In that sense, maybe we are their continuation. The Earth didn't destroy them, it transformed them into the foundation for what came next. This cycle didn't end, it evolved. We're part of the same story, just written in a new language. So the next time you step outside, take a moment to look down. The ground you walk on isn't just ground. It's a mosaic of worlds, each one layered over the last. Somewhere deep beneath, beyond reach or recognition, might lie the faintest traces of those who came before, not in monuments or machines, but in the chemistry of the soil itself. The layers beneath our feet are not silent. They're just speaking in a language that takes patience to hear, and if you listen long enough, you might notice that the Earth is still telling that story, softly, steadily, through every shift of wind and grain of dust. It's been speaking it for billions of years, and we, for a brief and precious moment, are part of the sentence. If the layers beneath our feet are Earth's memory, then its surface is the part that forgets. Planets, like people, have their own kind of amnesia. They remember through chemistry and erosion, through the quiet work of pressure and heat, but they forget through movement. Tectonic plates slide, oceans expand and contract, ice scrapes away entire continents. Over millions of years, a planet can lose all trace of its past selves. To the casual observer, it looks ancient and wise, but beneath that impression lies a system that is constantly overwriting its own history. Earth is particularly good at this. It's one of the few planets we know that never stops reshaping itself. Venus has buried its surface under volcanic flows. Mars keeps the scars of its early life frozen in dust, but Earth is both destroyer and curator, endlessly erasing and redrawing its own surface. It's the ultimate recycler. What was once mountain becomes sand. What was once seabed becomes plateau. What was once a thriving ecosystem becomes a thin mineral seam locked deep underground. If a civilization existed here before ours, the planet would have quietly folded it back into its geology, just as it has done with everything else. We can think of this process as a kind of geological forgetting. Not deliberate, of course. The planet doesn't have intention, but inevitable. It's built into the mechanics of being alive at a planetary scale. The same dynamism that allows Earth to support life also guarantees that evidence of life will eventually vanish. The crust moves in slow motion, but over time it's unstoppable. Oceans open, mountains crumble, sediment drifts, magma rises. Nothing stays where it begins. You can trace this cycle through what geologists call the Wilson cycle, the rhythmic pattern of supercontinents forming and breaking apart. Every few 100 million years, the world's land masses gather into a single cluster, only to split and drift apart again. The last one, Pangaea, existed around 300 million years ago. Before that there were others, Rodinia, Columbia, Nuna. Each version of Earth had its own geography, its own climates, its own forms of life. Between those ages, everything on the surface was erased. Continents sank, mountains were subducted, oceans swallowed coastlines whole. That kind of movement doesn't just erase cities or monuments, it changes the canvas itself. Imagine if you wrote your life story on a sheet of paper, and every few hours the paper folded itself up, burned the edges, and then rewrote new lines on top. After a while, all you'd have left would be fragments, ghost letters embedded in the fibres, half visible and impossible to read. That's what Earth's memory looks like, an accumulation of fragments, none of them complete. When scientists drill into ancient rocks, they sometimes find traces of past atmospheres locked inside. Tiny bubbles of air preserved in salt crystals or ice cores tell us what the planet once breathed. But even those records only go back so far, a few million years at best for ice, a few 100 million for stone. Beyond that, the evidence is distorted or gone. The deeper you go, the fuzzier the story becomes until eventually the record turns to noise. If there were civilizations before us, the only proof might be buried not in the crust, but in the chemistry of the air and oceans, long since mixed into new forms. The Earth's forgetfulness has always fascinated scientists. It's both a curse and a blessing. Without it, the world would be a static monument, frozen under the weight of its own history. With it, life can start over again and again, each time with a clean slate. The same process that erases also renews. Volcanic eruptions wipe out ecosystems but create fertile soil. Glaciation scrapes the land bare but leaves behind valleys and rivers. The cycle of destruction and renewal is not just natural, it's necessary. Still, it's unsettling to realize how absolute that forgetting can be. We think of extinction as an end, but in planetary terms it's a transformation. The biosphere doesn't stop, it changes shape. A civilization could disappear not through violence or collapse, but simply through absorption. Its buildings could crumble into sand, its tools oxidize into minerals, its knowledge dissolve into myths that outlive their creators. The planet would continue, unbothered, its surface quietly resetting for the next experiment. Even now, while we feel stable and enduring, The Earth is rearranging itself under our feet. The continents move a few centimetres a year, about as fast as your fingernails grow. That doesn't sound like much, but in 1,000,000 years an entire coastline can shift beyond recognition. In 10 million, oceans can vanish, and mountains can rise from flat plains. The map of the world we know today is only a snapshot in a film that has been running for billions of years. If you could speed it up, you'd see continents dancing, colliding, breaking apart, spinning around the poles like slow-moving puzzle pieces. This constant motion explains why planetary amnesia is so thorough. The crust isn't a fixed archive, it's a conveyor belt. Oceanic crust forms at ridges, spreads outward, and is pulled back down into the mantle at subduction zones. In the process, anything resting on that crust is dragged deep into the Earth, melted and recycled. The oldest ocean floor still intact today is about 200 million years old, just 5% of the planet's age. Everything older has been consumed. If a civilization once thrived on a now vanished continent, perhaps on land that has since become part of the Pacific Abyss, its ruins would have been carried into the mantle and erased. You can see echoes of that process in how little of Earth's earlier surface survives. The oldest rocks we found are about 4 billion years old, scattered remnants of ancient continental crust. They're rare because the rest has been destroyed. Even these survivors are not pristine. They've been heated, compressed, and chemically altered so many times that their original structures are nearly gone. They hold faint isotopic clues about the planet's infancy, but no direct record of what the surface looked like then. If something existed during those ages, microbial mats, primitive ecosystems, even hypothetical ancient builders, the evidence is gone, melted into the planet's ongoing story. This forgetting isn't unique to Earth. All planets have their ways of erasing themselves. Mars once had rivers, lakes, and perhaps oceans, but now it's a dry expanse of dust and stone. Venus, Earth's twin in size and composition, may have had a temperate climate before runaway greenhouse gases transformed it into a world of acid clouds and searing heat. Even the moon, seemingly frozen and unchanging, has been pocked and reworked by impacts over billions of years. Every world remembers briefly and then forgets again, its surface renewed by geology, its scars softened by time. There's a theory among planetary scientists that this cycle of memory and amnesia might be the rule, not the exception. Planets that can sustain life long enough for intelligence to arise are also the ones most likely to erase evidence of it. The same tectonic and atmospheric processes that make a world habitable also make it forgetful. A world without erosion, without plate movement, without weather would preserve its past perfectly, but it would probably be lifeless. Life thrives on change, and change destroys memory. In that sense, the amnesia of planets might be a kind of cosmic irony. The conditions that allow civilizations to exist also guarantee that their traces won't last. The very act of living on a dynamic world ensures that the past is temporary. Every intelligent species, no matter how advanced, eventually vanishes beneath the same processes that sustained it. The surface that nurtures life also devours it. The Earth is a teacher with a short attention span, always ready to begin the lesson again. Yet, even in its forgetfulness, the planet leaves subtle clues for those who know where to look. Deep in the crust, zircon crystals preserve chemical signatures from the earliest days of the Earth's formation. In them are tiny inclusions that contain traces of ancient water, perhaps the same water that still flows in our oceans today. That continuity is remarkable. It means that while the land forgets, the water remembers. The molecules we drink may have once been part of ancient seas that touch continents long vanished. The hydrological cycle, endlessly circulating through evaporation and rain, is one of the few planetary systems that never completely resets. Through it, a faint memory of all past ages survives. It's possible that something similar happens on other planets. If Mars once had an atmosphere thick enough to support liquid water, its chemical memory might still linger in the rocks. If Venus had oceans before its transformation, traces of that lost epoch might be buried deep beneath its crust. In that sense, every planet carries two histories, one visible, the other hidden. The visible history is the one we can study through craters, valleys, and mountains. The hidden history is written in chemistry, in isotopes, in the patterns of how matter has moved over billions of years. The latter is harder to read but far more complete. It's the closest thing planets have to memory. Still, even chemistry forgets eventually. Radioactive decay, diffusion, metamorphism, these are the tools of planetary amnesia. Over long enough timescales, even the atoms rearrange themselves. Carbon becomes stone, oxygen becomes bound in minerals, iron oxidizes and changes colour. What we think of as permanence is, in reality, just slow transformation. Every molecule is part of a long conversation between order and entropy. That's what makes the search for lost civilization so complex. We're not just looking for artifacts, we're looking for anomalies in a system that is built to heal itself. The Earth doesn't keep scars forever. It closes them, smooths them over, folds them into its next incarnation. If intelligence has arisen before, it's probably not marked by ruins, but by patterns in the way the planet has changed. Subtle shifts in composition, unexplained chemical layers, odd isotopic ratios. We might already have seen such traces and not recognized them for what they were. And yet, this forgetfulness isn't something to mourn. It's what allows new beginnings. The amnesia of planets is the reason life can start again after every mass extinction. It's the reset button built into the structure of the cosmos. Without it, the surface would become cluttered, frozen under the weight of its own history. With it, there's room for renewal, for evolution to try again, for consciousness to emerge once more in some new form. Maybe that's the real pattern. Not a single unbroken line of civilization, but a series of experiments, each one emerging from the planet's last forgetting. When we look at the sky and wonder if we're alone, we're asking not just whether other civilizations exist now, but whether the universe remembers any of them. Maybe the stars too have their own kind of amnesia. Stellar systems are born and destroyed, planets come and go, galaxies collide and scatter. Memory at every scale is temporary, yet from that impermanence arises the possibility of life, thought, and renewal. Perhaps that's what intelligence really is, the universe briefly remembering itself before forgetting again. A pattern that emerges, reflects, and dissolves back into the flow of time. On a planetary scale, that reflection might look like civilization. On a cosmic scale, it's just one of the many ways matter learns to be aware for a moment before entropy reclaims it. And so the Earth continues its slow forgetting, reshaping its surface, folding its past into its core. The mountains erode, the oceans shift, the continents drift. We live on a planet that is both archive and eraser, a storyteller that never stops revising. Its amnesia isn't a flaw, it's the reason there's still room for us to exist, to wonder, and to add our own brief line to the story. As you listen, somewhere beneath the surface, a rock is melting. Somewhere else, a new one is forming. The memory of one age is becoming the foundation of another. The process never ends, and that's what makes it beautiful. The Earth forgets, yes, but in its forgetting, it creates the possibility of remembering again. Through us, through whoever comes after, through whatever consciousness emerges next when the world decides it's ready to dream again. If the planet forgets with its shifting crust and restless mantle, then fossils are the fragments of memory that manage to escape. They are the whispers left in stone, faint, incomplete, and astonishingly rare. When you hold a fossil, what you're really holding is an interruption in the process of forgetting. A brief moment when the usual decay was stopped, when a living form was given a second life as mineral. It's a strange kind of immortality, one that doesn't preserve the individual, only the outline. The fossil record is often described as the archive of life, but it's more like a series of scattered notes. For every fossil we find, countless others have been lost. The conditions required for preservation are so specific that most of what has lived, even in recent history, leaves no trace at all. Soft-bodied creatures dissolve, bones disintegrate, entire ecosystems vanish without a mark. What we call the history of life is really the history of the lucky, those who happen to die in just the right place, at just the right time, and under just the right conditions. And yet, despite how incomplete it is, this archive still tells us that the story of life is far older and more complex than we once believed. It speaks in layers, in the arrangement of shells and bones, in the subtle shift from simple to complex forms. It's from this whispering record that we've learned of the great extinctions, the rises and falls of species, the long rhythms of evolution. But there are places in the fossil record where the whispers falter, where time seems to skip a beat. Periods of sudden change, unexplained transitions, missing layers. These gaps are where imagination begins to wander. What happened during those silences? Were they simply moments when the right conditions for fossilization didn't exist? Or do they hint at something more? Events, perhaps, that reshaped life so quickly that the record couldn't keep up? Some scientists call these gaps unconformities, but the word feels almost poetic. It suggests not just absence, but interruption. As if the Earth paused, took a breath, and then began again with a different voice. When we look into those silences, it's hard not to wonder whether something intelligent could have existed during one of them. The fossil record, after all, is biased toward hard parts and long durations. A civilization might last a few thousand years, or even a few million. But in geological terms, that's still barely a blink. Its structures would crumble, its materials would dissolve, and its story would vanish between the sedimentary lines. What we'd see millions of years later would look like nothing more than a subtle shift in chemistry, a faint layer of disturbance. It's not an unreasonable thought. There are moments in Earth's history when strange things appear in the record, not fossils of bones, but fossils of behaviour, sudden bursts of complexity that seem to come from nowhere. Around 540 million years ago, during what we call the Cambrian explosion, life diversified with astonishing speed. Complex body plans, hard shells, predation, all emerging in a geological instant. Before that, the record is sparse, populated mostly by simple forms. Afterward, it's crowded with new designs. It's one of the great mysteries of evolution. How did complexity appear so suddenly? Was it a natural threshold crossed by biology, or was it the reawakening of something older, a return of patterns that had been tried before and forgotten? To suggest that intelligence might have existed that far back feels implausible, but then so did the idea of deep time before we learned to read the rocks. Every discovery that once seemed impossible eventually became obvious once we found the evidence. What seems far-fetched today might be mundane tomorrow. The fossil record has a way of humbling certainty. Even within more recent layers, there are puzzles. Fossils of advanced tool use are nearly impossible to preserve, yet we occasionally find patterns that look uncannily deliberate. Bones arranged in geometric forms, scratches that seem too ordered to be random, impressions that resemble woven textures or carved surfaces. In almost every case, natural explanations exist. Erosion can mimic design, pressure can create symmetry, but sometimes, as with optical illusions, the mind refuses to let go of the feeling that there's intent hidden within the chaos. Still, even if all such patterns are natural, the fact that we can imagine other explanations says something about how we perceive the world. We are tuned to recognize intention, to find meaning in structure. A line in stone feels different when it looks carved. A fossilized pattern feels alive when it resembles something made. The human brain is wired for pattern recognition, and that instinct might be the very thing that connects us to any hypothetical intelligences that came before. If they existed, they too would have looked for meaning in the materials around them, leaving behind shapes, structures, and rhythms that once carried purpose. Time may have erased the purpose, but perhaps not the pattern. When paleontologists examine the fossil record, they sometimes describe it as having a heartbeat, a rhythm of diversification and extinction, of flourishing and collapse. Every few tens of millions of years, there's a spike in disappearance followed by a wave of new forms. It's a rhythm almost musical in its consistency. Some extinctions we understand: volcanic outbursts, asteroid impacts, climatic shifts. Others remain mysterious. The Earth seems to move through cycles of creation and destruction, each one clearing the stage for the next. If civilization is part of that rhythm, then perhaps it too rises and falls according to a pattern we haven't yet recognized. We tend to think of human history as separate from natural history, but in truth, it's just the latest chapter of the same story. If life can evolve intelligence once, it can do so again, and perhaps it already has more than once. The fossil record might be whispering that to us, not through what it shows, but through what it doesn't. Its silences might be as meaningful as its signals. There's another layer to this idea, one that ties biology and civilization together more closely than we might expect. Evolution doesn't forget everything. Even when species vanish, some of their genetic patterns persist. Genes get recycled, reused, modified. Traits that work tend to reappear in new forms. The same genetic building blocks that allowed fish to grow fins also allowed mammals to develop hands. The blueprint evolves, but it never starts from scratch. If civilizations arise as extensions of biology, as expressions of intelligence built from those same genetic codes, then perhaps civilizations evolve in the same way. Each one might inherit something from those that came before, not in culture or technology, but in instinct, in the deep structure of thought. That's an idea scientists sometimes refer to as convergence, the tendency of evolution to arrive at similar solutions in different times and places. Wings evolved independently in insects, birds, and bats. Eyes evolved dozens of times across unrelated lineages. Intelligence, too, might be a convergent feature, something that arises whenever life reaches a certain complexity. If that's true, then intelligence could be an ancient rhythm built into the fabric of evolution itself, appearing again and again after each reset. When you listen to the fossil record in that light, it sounds less like a static archive and more like a recurring melody. Each age plays its variation, building on the last, borrowing fragments of what came before. The Earth doesn't remember civilizations the way we wish it would, but perhaps it remembers their melody, the pattern of complexity rising and falling, the persistence of curiosity encoded in the very structure of life. It's not impossible to imagine that the curiosity driving us now, the urge to explore, to build, to understand, might be the echo of an earlier intelligence. Not its conscious thoughts, but its evolutionary signature carried forward through the same biological systems that survived extinction after extinction. If life is the Earth's memory, then maybe intelligence is its recurring dream. The fossil record, sparse and quiet as it is, might be the dream's faint trace. Of course, science deals in evidence, not metaphors. The fossils we can touch, measure and date tell a clear story of natural evolution. They show the slow emergence of complexity, not a sudden appearance of machines or monuments. But science also thrives on questions, and the fossil record is full of them. Each new discovery seems to open more gaps than it closes. Every species we identify reminds us of 10,000 more we'll never know. The record is incomplete not because nature hides from us, but because time moves faster than preservation. If we could somehow condense the planet's history into a single day, human civilization would appear only in the last fraction of a second before midnight. The rest of that day, almost the entire story, would be filled with other forms of life, other experiments, other forgotten worlds. Somewhere in that stretch there might have been other sparks of awareness. The record, being what it is, would not preserve them. It can't. The fossil record remembers bodies, not minds. That's one of the quiet limitations of our study of the past. Consciousness doesn't fossilize. We can find the skulls of ancient species, measure their brain cases, infer their behavior, but we can't know what they thought, what they feared, what they imagined. The awareness that once flickered behind those eyes is gone, leaving only bone. If intelligence existed in another form long before us, it might have left no physical sign at all. Its thoughts, its creations, its sense of self would have dissolved with time, leaving only the faintest chemical traces or none at all. And yet, sometimes even those traces feel like whispers. In certain layers, geologists find isotopic anomalies, ratios of elements that don't match natural expectations. Most are explained by known processes, but a few remain uncertain. They could be the result of unusual climate events, massive volcanic activity, or even biological revolutions. But it's also possible, however unlikely, that some represent interactions between life and environment we don't yet understand. If earlier intelligent species altered their world in ways similar to us, the evidence might look like just another natural fluctuation. To listen to the fossil record, then, is to listen to a chorus of absences. It's a conversation where most of the participants have left, their words carried away by time. We only hear the echoes. But sometimes, those echoes align in ways that feel intentional, not because they are, but because our own minds complete the pattern. The fossil record invites us to imagine, to fill the silence with stories. In that sense, it connects science and wonder more closely than almost anything else. When you picture the Earth's ancient oceans filled with creatures now long extinct, it's easy to feel a strange kinship with them, not because we share their forms, but because we share their fate. They lived, they adapted, they vanished. We are part of the same cycle. The fossils they left are reminders not just of what was, but of what will be. One day, perhaps, traces of us will join them, the imprint of a footprint, the outline of a structure, a small fragment of bone turned to stone. Maybe, far in the future, someone else will find it and wonder who we were, the way we wonder about those who came before. The whispers in the fossil record tell us that nothing lasts, but also that nothing is ever truly lost. Every extinction clears the way for renewal. Every silence makes room for another voice. Life keeps finding its way back into the story. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between those lines, there might be the faintest echo of civilizations older than imagination, not erased, but folded into the rhythm of the earth, waiting for someone patient enough to hear them again. The record will keep whispering, in stone and dust, as it always has. It doesn't matter whether the next listener is human or something entirely new. The story will continue, written in the same slow language of sediment and time. And we, for a brief and luminous moment, are part of that sentence. Every story about the deep past eventually reaches a point where science fades into speculation and curiosity takes over. That's where the strange artifacts begin to appear, the objects that shouldn't exist, the pieces of the puzzle that don't quite fit. They surface now and then, usually in the hands of miners, farmers, or explorers who stumble upon them by accident. A metallic sphere inside solid rock, a patterned mark on a slab of coal, a tool embedded in a layer of sediment said to be millions of years old. Most turn out to have ordinary explanations, a misdated layer, a natural shape mistaken for a crafted one. But a few remain stubbornly ambiguous. These are the artifacts that shouldn't be. They occupy a peculiar place in our collective imagination. Too strange to dismiss outright, too uncertain to accept fully. For centuries, such discoveries have been presented as clues that humanity's timeline might be longer than we think, or that another civilization might once have walked the earth long before us. Scientists, cautious by nature, rarely give them much weight. But the allure persists. Even a single authentic artifact, if proven to be truly ancient, would change everything we know about history. It's not the artifact itself that matters most, but the possibility it represents, that our story is not the first. Let's imagine for a moment what one of these objects might be. Picture a small metallic sphere, perfectly smooth, about the size of a marble. It's found embedded in a block of rock that geologists estimate to be over 2 billion years old. The miner who finds it is astonished. How could something so precise exist in a layer of stone formed before multicellular life? The sphere is passed from hand to hand, studied by curious minds, and eventually ends up in a museum drawer, labelled with a question mark. Later tests show it's made of an alloy found in nature, formed under specific pressure and temperature conditions, and the mystery is solved. At least partially. But the image remains, a perfect shape where none should be. There are dozens of stories like this. Some are hoaxes, others are misinterpretations, but a few are simply unsolved. Ancient coins found in coal seams, carved stones in strata thought to predate humans, tiny metallic spirals discovered in Siberian riverbeds, no larger than a grain of sand but engineered with startling precision. Skeptics point to contamination, misidentification, or natural processes that can mimic design. All reasonable explanations. Yet something about these anomalies captures the imagination precisely because they sit on the edge of understanding. Science, after all, is built on anomalies. Every major discovery began as something that didn't fit the model, an orbit that didn't match predictions, a chemical reaction that produced the unexpected, a fossil in the wrong layer. Most anomalies vanish once we understand them better. A few, however, open entire new fields of knowledge. The artifacts that shouldn't be may never pass that threshold, but they remind us that our knowledge of the past is still incomplete. If an ancient civilization did exist, what traces would it leave behind that we could still find? Buildings and monuments would vanish quickly, swallowed by erosion or buried under sediment. Metal would corrode, wood and fabric would rot, glass would shatter and weather away. After a few million years, only stone might survive, and even that not forever. What might persist longer are materials that nature doesn't make on its own. Refined alloys, plastics, complex ceramics. These substances could remain detectable in microscopic fragments, long after everything else has turned to dust. And indeed, we're already beginning to leave such traces ourselves. Geologists have coined a term for the thin layer of synthetic debris now forming across the planet, the technofossil layer. It contains microplastics, aluminum alloys, and radionuclides from nuclear activity. These are markers that future scientists, or whoever comes after us, will be able to identify instantly as artificial. They won't look like natural deposits. They'll look like signs of intervention. If we can leave such a layer after only a few centuries of industrial activity, then it's possible, even likely, that a previous civilization would have left something similar. The difficulty is that the geological record beyond a few 100 million years becomes too chaotic to interpret. Older layers have been melted, crushed, or recycled by tectonic processes. The evidence, if it existed, might still be there. Not as objects, but as altered chemistry, traces of rare elements, or isotopic ratios that don't match natural formation patterns. Some researchers have even proposed looking for these chemical signatures deliberately. If a civilization once burned fossil fuels, for instance, it would leave a distinctive carbon isotope imbalance, similar to what we're producing now. Over tens of millions of years, that imbalance would fade but not disappear entirely. It might remain as a faint signal in deep sediments. Searching for such signs is difficult, but it's a growing area of curiosity. The logic is simple. If we can detect our own impact on the planet, we can also look for the ghost of someone else's. Still, it's the physical anomalies that tend to capture people's attention. The tangible objects, the things you can hold, the mystery spheres, the intricate spirals, the strange marks on stone. Each one becomes a small portal into what-ifs. What if these are remnants of something more? What if they're not mistakes of nature but artifacts of memory? pieces of a civilization erased by time. When archaeologists study the deep past, they often speak of context. An artifact without context, without a clear connection to the layer and environment in which it was found, tells us almost nothing. It could have been moved by erosion, displaced by animals, or even introduced by humans in recent centuries. The artifacts that shouldn't be often lack that context. They are isolated finds, stripped of surroundings. That in itself might be part of the reason they're so haunting. They exist without a story, without a place in the record. They are quite literally out of time. The human mind has a particular reaction to such things. We don't like loose ends. When confronted with something that doesn't fit, we instinctively reach for patterns that make sense. Sometimes that leads us toward discovery, other times toward myth. In the case of these out-of-place artifacts, both paths coexist. To the scientific mind, their curiosity is to be tested and explained. To the imaginative one, they're evidence of forgotten worlds. And in a way, both perspectives are valuable. The scientist's skepticism keeps us grounded. The dreamer's wonder keeps us searching. Every time an anomaly turns out to have a natural explanation, we learn a little more about how the Earth works. And every time one remains unsolved, we're reminded that our understanding is still growing. It's in that balance between explanation and mystery that real curiosity lives. Some of the most intriguing anomalies come not from physical objects, but from stories passed down through generations. Myths of tools or structures found where they shouldn't be, of ancient machinery buried in rock, of lights and sounds deep underground. Most of these tales dissolve under scrutiny, but their persistence says something about human nature. We want to believe that we're part of a larger story, that our civilization isn't a solitary spark, but a link in an unseen chain. The artifacts that shouldn't be give shape to that longing. Imagine, for a moment, what it would mean if one of them were real, if a single, indisputable artifact were found in rock older than any human. A carved object, a fragment of technology, something that couldn't be explained by geology alone. The world would change overnight. Every field of science would have to reorient. History would stretch not by thousands, but by millions of years. Humanity would no longer be the beginning of civilization, but its continuation. The sense of isolation that comes from believing we're alone in time would dissolve into a broader belonging. We'd be inheritors, not inventors. But maybe in a subtler sense we already are. Even if there are no ancient artifacts waiting in stone, the very idea of them points to something true. Civilization itself is an artifact, a product of geology, biology, and time. The minerals that form our machines were forged in the hearts of stars. The metals we shape are as old as the universe. The tools we use today are built from matter that has already lived countless lives. Each invention is a rearrangement of ancient materials, a continuation of processes older than thought. So when we imagine artifacts that shouldn't exist, maybe what we're really recognizing is the continuity of creation. Every object we make is a collaboration with the planet, a temporary form given to timeless elements. Even if earlier civilizations are only imagined, the materials we share with them are real. Iron, copper, silica, carbon, all part of the same ancient stock. The difference is only in arrangement, in how consciousness chooses to shape the raw material of existence. It's also worth considering that our definition of artifact might be too narrow. We look for tools and structures because that's what our civilization produces. But another kind of intelligence might leave behind different traces, biological rather than mechanical, or chemical rather than architectural. Perhaps their artifacts were genetic modifications that still echo in the DNA of modern species. Perhaps they communicated through alterations in the environment, patterns too subtle for us to recognize. The artifacts we overlook might be the most pervasive of all. Even among humans, some of our most enduring creations aren't physical objects but changes in systems. Agriculture, domestication, atmospheric modification. These leave marks not as tools but as shifts in the landscape. If a pre-human civilization once cultivated the land, we might mistake its traces for natural soil variation or fossilized pollen. The boundary between natural and artificial, after all, is a human distinction. To the Earth, everything is just process. Still, the fascination with impossible artifacts persists because it speaks to a deep emotional truth. It's the same reason we're drawn to ruins, to lost cities, to the edges of maps. We want to feel connected to something larger than our own brief moment, to imagine that others once walked here, built here, wandered here, gives our existence a sense of continuity. Even if those others are only hypothetical, they serve as mirrors, reminding us that we too are temporary. The artifacts that shouldn't be, whether real or imagined, serve another purpose too. They remind us that discovery often begins with doubt. The moment we find something that doesn't fit, we're forced to question our assumptions. That questioning is the spark of science, the start of every major shift in understanding. Even if every one of these anomalies turns out to be natural, they've already done their work by expanding the boundaries of curiosity, and maybe that's what they were meant to do, not as messages from another civilization, but as invitations from the universe itself to keep asking questions. Each mystery object, each unexplainable pattern, is a small reminder that certainty is temporary, that knowledge is a moving frontier. The artifacts that shouldn't be are, in their own quiet way, the fossils of curiosity, the enduring evidence that wonder itself survives the passage of time. So the next time you hear about one of these discoveries, a hammer in stone, a gear in coal, a carving in an ancient bedrock, it might not matter whether it's real or mistaken. What matters is that it makes you pause and imagine. It makes you look at the world not as a completed map, but as a mystery still unfolding. The artifacts that shouldn't be are, perhaps, not relics of the past, but reflections of our longing to remember what time itself has forgotten. And as the night deepens and the world grows quiet again, you can almost feel the weight of all those forgotten hands that might have shaped the world before us. Maybe their creations are still here, not as metal or stone, but as inspiration, as the same spark that drives us to explore, to build, to wonder. The artifacts might be gone, but the impulse that made them endures, waiting for each new civilization to rediscover it, in their own way, beneath the layers of time. The story of life on Earth has never been a steady climb upward. It's a rhythm, a pulse. Long periods of calm and abundance, followed by sudden silences that stretch across millions of years. These silences are the great extinctions, the moments when the world forgets most of what it once held. They arrive like deep breaths between verses, resetting the melody of evolution. If the planet has amnesia, these are its sharpest episodes, the moments when memory is erased and life begins again as if from scratch. There have been 5 of these great extinctions that we know of, each marking a line between ages. The Ordovician, when ancient seas emptied of life. The Devonian, when forests choked the oceans with decay. The Permian, when almost everything died. The Triassic, when early reptiles vanished, clearing space for the dinosaurs. And the Cretaceous, when those dinosaurs in turn gave way to mammals and eventually to us. Between each of these calamities there were smaller ones too, local resets, lesser silences. The record of life is punctuated by endings, but in those endings lies the strange persistence of renewal. The fossil record tells us that after every collapse life returns, often in unfamiliar shapes. Each silence is followed by a burst of creativity, as though the Earth itself is experimenting again. After the Permian extinction, which wiped out nearly 90% of all species, the survivors were few and small. Yet from those remnants, new forms evolved, creatures that would dominate the planet for hundreds of millions of years. It's almost as if destruction is a necessary part of creation's rhythm, a pause that allows the next idea to emerge. What's remarkable is not just that life comes back, but how quickly it does so, at least in geological terms. Within a few million years after each extinction, ecosystems reappear. Coral reefs grow again, forests spread, predators hunt. The slate is wiped clean, but only briefly. The silence never lasts forever. This resilience is one of the most mysterious and hopeful things about our planet. It suggests that life isn't fragile, it's persistent. It waits patiently beneath the surface, ready to start again when the conditions return. But there's another side to that rhythm, one that makes the silences feel eerie. When you look at the timing of extinctions, a pattern begins to emerge. Roughly every 26 to 30 million years, something happens. Not always catastrophic, not always global, but enough to leave a mark. Some scientists have speculated that the cause might be external, a comet's orbit, a fluctuation in the solar system's path through the galaxy, even the influence of a distant companion star. Others believe the trigger lies within the Earth itself. Cycles of volcanic activity, shifts in climate, changes in the composition of the atmosphere. Whatever the cause, the result is always the same, a silence, then a renewal. Imagine for a moment what those silences must have looked like. Entire forests turning to ash, oceans turning acidic. The sky darkened for decades, a planet reduced to quiet. Then, slowly, the noise returns. The first shoots of green push through the blackened soil. Small creatures creep from hiding, testing the air. Over millions of years, complexity rebuilds itself, layer by layer, as though the memory of life is written not in form, but in possibility. Now imagine that within those silences something else might have happened, something that the fossil record could never tell us. If intelligence had arisen before us, could it have vanished during one of those resets? If a civilization had thrived before the Permian extinction, for instance, it would have been obliterated so completely that not even its memory could survive. The rock layers from that time show devastation beyond comprehension. Vast volcanic eruptions that covered continents, oceans that turned to poison, a planet gasping under the weight of its own atmosphere. Nearly all complex life disappeared. If a civilization had existed then, its story would have ended in fire. The thought isn't so much speculative as it is humbling. Every intelligent species that might arise on a planet like ours must face this cycle eventually. Catastrophe is built into the fabric of planetary history. Extinction isn't a question of if, but when. Civilization, in that sense, is a temporary phase, a brief flowering between inevitable silences. Perhaps intelligence itself is one of nature's many experiments, recurring whenever conditions allow, only to vanish again when the rhythm resets. It's easy to see these events as tragedies, but the Earth doesn't mourn. It simply continues. The silences between extinctions aren't empty. They're intervals of preparation. They're the spaces where resilience gathers strength, where new forms wait in the shadows of the old. Even now, scientists studying the deep sea and the frozen poles are finding species that seem unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. Living fossils, survivors of past catastrophes. These are the keepers of continuity, the quiet witnesses that persist through every reset. If you look at the fossil record closely, you'll notice that after each extinction, evolution seems to accelerate. New species appear faster, ecosystems diversify more quickly. It's as though the memory of what worked before lingers, not in fossils but in DNA. Evolution doesn't start from zero after an extinction. It starts from what remains. Genes that once belonged to creatures long gone are repurposed, reassembled, tested again in new combinations. Life remembers through structure, even when it forgets through form. In that sense, the silences between extinctions are not truly silent. They're full of invisible preparation. Beneath the apparent stillness, chemical reactions continue, ecosystems recover, the planet rebalances. It's a slow conversation between destruction and renewal, one that never ends. Perhaps that's how intelligence too returns, not as a continuation of one species, but as the reawakening of a possibility that has always existed. It's worth wondering how many times the Earth has held its breath like this. How many civilizations, if they ever arose, were lost in those pauses. If they burned brightly and then vanished, their traces would be as thin as any other layer in the rock, a brief signal of imbalance, a whisper of change, erased by time's patient hand. We like to think of our own age as unique, but in geological terms it might be one of many bright intervals between silences. Our modern world, with all its noise and speed, sits precariously within one of these interludes. The last great extinction was 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous. Since then, life has rebounded spectacularly. Mammals diversified, forests spread, oceans teemed again. And now, here we are, building cities, sending machines into space, splitting atoms, and altering the atmosphere, all within the blink of an eye. From the perspective of deep time, we are the latest spark of complexity before whatever comes next. Whether the next silence arrives in 1,000 years or 1,000,000, it will come as surely as all the others did. This doesn't mean we're doomed. It simply means we're temporary. The silence will come, and something else will follow. Perhaps that's the way the universe ensures diversity, through endless cycles of forgetting and rediscovery. Each extinction is both an ending and a clearing of the canvas. Each silence is the moment before the next song begins. There's a kind of beauty in that rhythm. It means that nothing is wasted, not even destruction. The elements that once formed dinosaurs now form birds. The calcium in our bones was once part of ancient shells. The iron in our blood came from stars that died long before the Earth was born. Every extinction feeds into creation. The silences between them are just the quiet intervals where matter reconsiders its form. Some scientists have tried to model how long it would take for civilization, any civilization, to recover after a global collapse. The answer depends on what survives. If a few humans endure, it might take tens of thousands of years to rebuild. If none do, but the planet remains habitable, another intelligent species might arise within 50 million. In either case, the silence would be long, but not eternal. Intelligence seems to be a recurring outcome when life has time enough to explore possibilities. And if that's true, then perhaps the Earth's history is less a chain of separate events and more a continuous experiment. Each extinction, each silence, each resurgence is part of a long unbroken process. The planet learning, through trial and error, how to sustain awareness. We are one of its recent attempts. Whether we succeed or fail, the process will continue. The fossil record doesn't show emotion, but if you could listen to it, you might hear a quiet persistence running through it. Every mass extinction is followed by a soft murmur of life returning, adapting, diversifying. It's a patient sound, almost like breathing. The silences between extinctions are the planet's way of resetting its rhythm, of pausing between breaths. And in those pauses there's room for something else, reflection, adaptation, and maybe even memory. If earlier civilizations were lost in the silences, perhaps their influence lingers not in artifacts, but in the resilience of life itself. Every time consciousness reappears, it might be inheriting more than we realize. Instincts shaped by the past, tendencies built into the fabric of the biosphere. Perhaps that's why curiosity feels so universal, so inevitable. It's not new, it's old, older than any single species. It's the voice that re-emerges after every silence, asking once again, what happened before us? Even now, as we face our own ecological challenges, that voice is speaking. The Earth is changing rapidly. Species disappearing, climates shifting, oceans warming. Some call this the beginning of a sixth extinction. If that's true, we are living through the transition between one era and the next. But unlike those who may have come before, we have something new, awareness. We can see the silence coming. We can measure it, model it, even try to delay it. For the first time, a species might have the chance to alter the rhythm. Whether we succeed or not, the attempt itself becomes part of the pattern. It's possible that this awareness is what all the earlier cycles have been moving toward. The silences may have been necessary steps, teaching the planet how to produce intelligence capable of reflection. Maybe we are not just the latest civilization, but the one that finally learned to listen to the pattern, to recognize the rhythm instead of being swept away by it. Still, awareness doesn't guarantee permanence. The silence will come eventually, because it always does. But perhaps that's not something to fear. In the long rhythm of the earth, silence is not the opposite of life, but part of it. It's the interval that allows renewal. Even if humanity were to vanish, the planet would continue its cycle, and one day, maybe far in the future, another consciousness would rise, find traces of us, and wonder about the silences between its own histories. The more we study extinction, the clearer it becomes that the Earth isn't fragile. It's adaptable. It's the species, the civilizations, the moments within it that are fleeting. The planet has survived asteroid impacts, ice ages, and volcanic winters. Each time it has emerged transformed. We are part of that transformation now. The silence that follows us, whenever it comes, will carry our memory in ways we can't predict. In chemical traces, in altered evolution, in the faint shift of balance that our existence created. The fossil record will one day tell that story if anyone is there to read it. It will show a thin, strange layer, our era, marked by plastics, metals and altered isotopes. Above it, a new kind of sediment will begin to form, the first layers of whatever comes next. The silence between will last as long as it must. Then, as always, something new will rise from it. And perhaps, in that distant future, another voice will ask the same quiet question. Were we the first, or merely the latest? The answer will be the same as it has always been. Both. Every civilization is the first of its kind, and every one is what the last left behind. The silences between them are not empty. They're the spaces where the universe learns to begin again. When you think of memory, you probably imagine something stored, written in books, encoded in the brain, captured in photographs. But the planet has its own kind of memory, and nowhere is it more quietly profound than in water. Unlike rock or fossil, water doesn't preserve shape. It doesn't hold form. It moves constantly, always slipping between states. Yet, in its ceaseless motion, it remembers everything. Every drop on this planet has been here since the beginning. It has cycled through rivers, clouds, glaciers and oceans for billions of years. The same water you drink today once moved through the gills of ancient fish, once fell as rain on forests that no longer exist, once filled the lungs of creatures whose bones now sleep beneath the sea. It's easy to forget that. Water seems so ordinary, so familiar, but it's the most ancient witness the earth has. Rocks can melt and reform, mountains can crumble, but water endures. It travels, transforms, and carries the chemical fingerprints of everything it touches. In that way, it is the planet's great archivist, not of structure, but of essence. If you could trace a single molecule of water through time, its journey would be almost endless. It might begin in the ocean, evaporate into vapor, drift across the sky, fall as rain on a mountaintop, sink into the soil, run through a river, and eventually return to the sea. Along the way, it would collect traces of minerals, microorganisms, and organic compounds. It would record, in its chemistry, the history of every environment it passes through. Over billions of years, it would be recycled countless times, flowing through plants, animals, and atmospheres. It would be part of storms, glaciers, blood, and breath. It would have been inside everything that ever lived. That's what makes the long memory of water so fascinating. It never stops moving, yet it connects every era of the Earth. The same hydrogen and oxygen atoms have been here since before life began. They were part of the early oceans where the first cells emerged, the same oceans that once covered vast parts of the continents. When those oceans receded, the water didn't vanish. It became clouds, lakes, ice. It seeped underground, forming aquifers that still hold ancient rain from ages long past. Some of that water hasn't seen the surface in millions of years, trapped in stone and salt. Scientists who study these deep reserves sometimes refer to them as fossil water, not because it contains fossils, but because it is itself a relic, unchanged since ancient climates and vanished landscapes. The memory water carries isn't metaphorical, it's literal, encoded in isotopes, salinity, and trace elements. By analysing ice cores drilled from glaciers, scientists can reconstruct the history of the planet's atmosphere, temperature, volcanic activity, even solar radiation. Tiny air bubbles trapped in ancient ice contain samples of air from hundreds of thousands of years ago. Within those bubbles we can hear the breath of the Pleistocene, the faint chemical echoes of eras when humans were just beginning to walk upright. In the deep ocean, sediments hold another record, a slow accumulation of particles that fall through the water like snow. These layers capture changes in temperature, ocean currents, and biology across millions of years. In some places, the sediment record is so continuous that it serves as a near-perfect timeline of the planet's climate. Each grain of silt, each shell fragment, is a word in a language the Earth has been speaking for eons. Water has seen everything, and it forgets nothing. It has flowed through the remains of every species, washed over every continent and filled every ocean basin. When continents drift, the water moves with them. When glaciers melt, the same molecules find their way into rivers and clouds. Even when trapped deep underground, water remains active, dissolving minerals, altering rock, shaping the hidden architecture of the planet. And yet, for all its persistence, water is not static. It changes constantly, both in form and in memory. The ocean you see today is not the same ocean that existed when the dinosaurs swam. Its chemistry has evolved, its salinity has shifted, its temperature has fluctuated wildly over geological time. The creatures within it have come and gone, each contributing their remains to the sediment below, but the water itself, the molecules, are the same. It's as though the ocean forgets its inhabitants but remembers their presence. It carries the chemical ghost of everything that ever lived in it. If you think about it long enough, that realization becomes almost unsettling. Every raindrop, every wave, every cloud is made of ancient memory, circulating endlessly through the planet's veins. The water in your glass right now might once have been part of an ancient inland sea, might have fallen as snow on a long-vanished glacier, might have flowed through the roots of prehistoric forests. It might even have passed through another civilization, if one ever existed before ours, and carried fragments of their world into ours. It's an idea that's difficult to prove and easy to imagine. If an earlier civilization had reached a level of industry, their activities would have left traces in the water, pollutants, isotopic shifts, chemical anomalies. Some of those traces might still linger in deep ocean sediments, buried beneath millions of years of new material. If anyone in the distant future were to study our own age, they would find unmistakable signs of our presence in the oceans. Plastics, synthetic compounds, traces of radioactive elements. The water is already collecting our memory. There's a quiet symmetry in that. Just as water holds the memory of all who came before, it will carry ours forward, dispersing it through the endless cycle of evaporation and rain. Long after our cities are gone, traces of us will still circulate, microscopic particles of what we built, what we burned, what we left behind. The ocean doesn't distinguish between natural and artificial. It gathers everything, dissolves it, and carries it onward. In time, those traces will settle, blending into the planet's next version of itself. This is part of why water is sometimes called the Great Equalizer. It connects everything, from the deepest ocean trench to the highest cloud. It doesn't recognize boundaries, civilizations, or epochs. The same molecule can exist as vapor in the sky, ice in the poles, or blood in a living body. It's the medium through which life moves and the canvas upon which history is painted. And while the solid earth forgets through its endless reshaping, the water remembers through movement. Every current, every rainfall, every droplet is part of a planetary circulation that never stops. It links the past and future in a way that no other element can. The continents may drift apart, but the oceans always find their way back together. The water cycle is the planet's pulse, slow, steady, and eternal. Some scientists have suggested that the origins of life itself might lie in this fluid memory. The first organic molecules likely formed in shallow pools or deep-sea vents, where minerals and heat combined with water's unique chemistry to create complex structures. Those molecules, carried and recombined by flowing water, eventually gave rise to cells. In that sense, water didn't just witness the beginning of life, it participated in it. It wasn't the stage, but the storyteller. There's a certain humility in realizing that everything alive today is, in one way or another, a continuation of water's memory. Every cell in your body carries water that has been on this planet since its birth. That means that within you is a molecular connection to everything that has ever existed here. To ancient seas, to extinct creatures, to civilizations long gone or imagined. You are, quite literally, composed of planetary memory in motion. Even language reflects that connection. We speak of time flowing, of memory rippling, of thoughts drifting like currents. There's an instinctive association between water and continuity, perhaps because we recognize, even unconsciously, that it embodies the persistence we can only dream of. Water is patient. It moves at its own pace. It wears down mountains, fills valleys, and eventually even the hardest stone yields to its touch. There's another side to that patience, though, one that reminds us how small we are within it. Water doesn't rush toward preservation. It erases just as easily as it remembers. It carries sediment from one place to another, redistributing the planet's past into new forms. A river doesn't care what it carries. It moves forward, unendingly, until it becomes part of something larger. If civilizations have risen and fallen before, water was the first to wash over their remains, smoothing them into anonymity. That thought can feel melancholy, but it can also be strangely comforting. Because even if everything is erased, nothing is truly lost. The molecules remain. The elements continue their cycle. The memory persists, even if it's no longer legible. In that sense, water is the planet's way of promising continuity. It may change form endlessly, but it never disappears. You can see this continuity most clearly in the oceans, where the past and present coexist. Deep currents carry cold water from the poles to the equator, mixing layers that haven't seen the surface for centuries. These movements are so vast and slow that they operate on timescales beyond human comprehension. Some of the water moving through the deep Atlantic today last touched the surface in the age of the Roman Empire. Some in the Pacific hasn't surfaced since before civilization began. That means the ocean we look at isn't just a body of water, it's a layered history, a vast archive of temperature, chemistry, and motion. Every wave, every tide is part of a system that has been circulating for millions of years, quietly connecting the world's pasts and futures. And when it rains, that ancient memory falls anew, starting the cycle again. It's easy to imagine that if the earth itself could speak, it would sound like water. The endless rhythm of it, the way it adapts to every shape yet retains its identity, the way it remembers through change. Water doesn't resist time, it flows with it. It has no need to hold on to the past because it carries the past within it. So much of what we build, our cities, our machines, even our stories, is an attempt to achieve what water does effortlessly, persistence through change. We preserve photographs, carve monuments, write histories, hoping to resist forgetting. But water shows another way. It survives not by holding still, but by moving. It loses everything constantly, and in doing so, becomes eternal. And maybe that's the real secret of memory. Not in preservation, but in flow. The long memory of water isn't a static archive, but a living one. It changes shape, but the story continues. Every rainstorm, every melting glacier, every tide is part of the same ancient cycle. The past dissolves into the present, and the present becomes the seed of the future. Somewhere right now, a drop of rain is falling into the ocean. It may stay there for 1,000 years, then rise again as mist, travel halfway around the world, and fall once more as snow. It might melt, flow through rivers, be drunk by a person, and eventually return to the sea. Through it all, it will carry traces of everything it has touched, invisible yet real. That's what the long memory of water looks like. Constant movement, constant remembrance. And when you stand by a river or look at the waves, you're not just seeing the present moment. You're looking at billions of years of history flowing quietly past. The water beneath that surface has seen worlds rise and fall, species come and go, civilizations appear and vanish. It doesn't tell their stories in words or symbols, but in chemistry, in rhythm, in the quiet continuity of motion. If humanity were to disappear tomorrow, the water would continue without pause. It would absorb the remnants of our world, dissolve them, and carry them forward into whatever comes next. The oceans would still move, the rain would still fall, and somewhere far in the future, a new form of life might rise and drink from the same ancient source. It would carry within it, unknowingly, the molecules of everything that came before. That's the kind of memory the Earth keeps, not the sharp, specific recollection we know as humans, but a diffuse, enduring awareness. Water doesn't cling to moments, it connects them. It links beginnings and endings in a cycle too vast for any one species to grasp. It has been here since the first civilization, if there ever was one, and it will be here after the last. When you listen to rain, or to waves at night, you're hearing that memory in motion, the voice of the planet remembering itself, softly, endlessly, through the long conversation between sky and sea. Everything that exists eventually drifts toward disorder. It's a quiet rule that underlies all things, from the collapse of stars to the decay of atoms to the fading of memory. Scientists call it entropy, the gradual slide of systems from order to chaos. It's the reason ice melts, why buildings crumble, why civilizations fall. Entropy is not destruction, it's transformation. It's the natural tendency of energy to spread, of structure to loosen, of time to keep moving forward. If the Earth has its memory written in stone and water, then entropy is the eraser that moves across the page. Not suddenly, but patiently, unhurried, consistent. Every object, every thought, every arrangement of matter carries within it the inevitability of change. Nothing resists forever. The archaeology of time is in many ways a study of entropy, of how the past dissolves into the present and the present into the future, leaving behind fragments that we try to assemble into meaning. When archaeologists dig into the ground, they aren't really searching for the past. They're searching for what entropy has left behind, the pieces that resisted decay just long enough to be found. Every shard of pottery, every fossilized bone, every grain of ancient pollen is something that managed to outlast the pull of disorder. The deeper they dig, the more entropy they encounter. Time compresses everything it touches, turning vibrant moments into dust, dust into sediment, sediment into stone. The fascinating thing about entropy is that it doesn't simply erase, it transforms. In doing so, it creates new forms of beauty. A rusting bridge, a weathered statue, a cracked fossil. These are not failures of preservation, but examples of how time reinterprets matter. The same principle applies on a cosmic scale. The universe itself is a vast field of entropy, spreading energy evenly across space. Every star that burns, every planet that cools, every life that ends contributes to that balance. Entropy isn't a flaw, it's the reason anything happens at all. In the context of civilizations, entropy has a dual role. It destroys, but it also reveals. It takes apart what we build, but in doing so, it lays bare the structure of what we once were. When archaeologists study ancient ruins, what they see isn't just the collapse of walls or the erosion of stone, they see the pattern of decay itself. Entropy becomes the medium through which we understand history. If there were civilizations before us, lost to deep time, then entropy would have been their final historian. It would have dismantled their cities, dissolved their records, and scattered their creations into elements. But even then, traces might remain, not intact but transformed, buried, hidden in chemical changes or geological oddities. Entropy doesn't destroy information completely, it just spreads it out. Somewhere in the random arrangement of atoms, there are still echoes of every event that has ever happened. The difficulty is that time has mixed them too thoroughly for us to read. This is what makes the archaeology of time such a humbling pursuit. The further we look back, the less clear the picture becomes. What we see isn't the past itself, but a reconstruction built from fragments. Each layer we uncover adds context, but also uncertainty. It's like trying to read a book that has been burned and scattered to the wind, where every surviving word might belong to a different page. In a sense, the Earth itself is the greatest archaeological site imaginable, an archive billions of years old, written in shifting strata, flowing rivers, and decaying fossils. But it's also an archive that constantly edits itself. Tectonic motion buries evidence, weather erodes it, water dissolves it, fire transforms it. Each process driven ultimately by entropy, the slow dispersal of order into energy. It's easy to think of this as loss, but it's more accurate to see it as continuity. Entropy doesn't erase the universe, it recycles it. What was once structured becomes the raw material for new structure. The atoms that once made up ancient mountains now exist in the shells of marine life. The carbon from long-dead forests circulates through our lungs. Even the metals that form our technology were forged in ancient supernovas, themselves the product of entropy spreading energy outward. Destruction and creation are not opposites. They are phases of the same process. Consider what happens when an object decays. Say, a building collapsing over centuries. Dust accumulates, stone fractures, metal rusts. The materials disperse, but in doing so, they join other systems. Soil composition, atmospheric chemistry, groundwater flow. The building's existence doesn't end. It becomes part of the planet again. If an ancient civilization vanished millions of years ago, its essence would persist in the same way, dissolved into the Earth's cycles, indistinguishable from the rest of nature. Entropy, then, is both the destroyer of history and the reason history exists at all. Without it, time would have no direction. Everything would remain static, frozen in perfection. But it's the gradual loss of order that allows motion, memory, and evolution. The archaeology of time is the study of how meaning survives within that loss, how patterns persist despite decay. Even within our own brief history, you can see entropy at work in the most mundane details. Languages evolve, shedding old words and gaining new ones. Ideas spread and mutate. Technology advances, but older knowledge fades. Every generation rewrites the world in its own image, and in doing so forgets a little of what came before. That forgetting isn't a failure of culture, it's a manifestation of the same universal principle that governs stars and atoms. Nothing remains fixed. Yet, for all its inevitability, entropy leaves behind remarkable traces of resistance. There are things that persist longer than they should. Objects, structures, even stories that seem to defy time. The pyramids of Egypt still stand, weathered but recognizable. Ancient cave paintings still glow faintly beneath layers of mineral dust. Fossils endure for hundreds of millions of years. These are the exceptions, the rare victories of structure over chaos. But even they will eventually yield. Entropy has infinite patience. The balance between decay and endurance is what gives the archaeology of time its quiet tension. Every discovery is temporary, every artifact on borrowed time. Even the act of excavation accelerates entropy. The moment something is unearthed, it begins to deteriorate faster. Exposure to air, light, and moisture restarts the process that burial had slowed. Archaeology, in that sense, is not the reversal of time, but a brief pause within it. If you extend that perspective to a planetary scale, it becomes clear how impossible true permanence is. Mountains crumble, continents shift, climates change. The very features we think of as eternal are just temporary arrangements. Entropy is the sculptor that never stops working, carving away the edges of everything until it all becomes part of the same smooth horizon. And yet, within that vast process, there's something almost tender about the way fragments survive. The faint imprint of a leaf in stone, the curve of a fossil shell, the echo of a city's foundation buried beneath new soil. These remnants remind us that even as entropy moves forward, it leaves moments of grace, traces that allow future minds to imagine what once was. In physics, there's a concept known as the arrow of time, the idea that time moves only in one direction because entropy always increases. That arrow points from order to disorder, from structure to diffusion. But if you step back far enough, it's not a straight line, it's a loop. What decays in one place becomes order in another. The atoms of a fallen civilization might one day assemble into the structures of a new one. The same elements, rearranged, reborn. Entropy spreads things out, but it doesn't annihilate them. It's a process of redistribution, not erasure. That's why the archaeology of time is both a scientific and a philosophical pursuit. It's not just about uncovering what has been buried, it's about understanding how everything that was becomes everything that is. When we dig into the ground, we aren't just reaching into the past. We're participating in the same cycle that will one day turn us into sediment. The act of remembering is temporary. The act of becoming part of the earth is eternal. You can see entropy's quiet signature even in yourself. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought releases energy, moves atoms, spreads heat. Living things resist entropy for a while by maintaining internal order, but that resistance comes at a cost. We draw in energy, use it, and return it to the universe in a more disordered form. Life itself is a temporary defiance of entropy, a pattern that holds together just long enough to perceive the flow before joining it again. Civilizations do the same. They organize matter into cities, networks, technologies, temporary structures that channel energy into meaning. For a while they create order out of chaos. Then slowly the pattern unravels, roads crack, languages die, knowledge disperses. But even in that dispersal, something continues. Each civilization adds to the planet's complexity, contributes new forms, new materials, new arrangements of matter that become part of the next iteration. Entropy ensures that nothing lasts, but it also ensures that nothing is ever truly gone. If we think about entropy as the planet's handwriting, then the archaeology of time is our attempt to read it. Every fossil, every ruin, every trace of the past is a letter in that script. We can only ever read fragments, but the meaning is there in the rhythm. Entropy writes in erosion, in decay, in the quiet blending of boundaries. The message it conveys is simple and eternal. Everything changes, and that change is the source of all beauty. This perspective can change how we think about loss. When a civilization vanishes, we tend to imagine that everything it was is erased. But entropy doesn't erase, it recycles. The copper from its tools becomes part of the soil, nourishing new growth. The carbon from its fires joins the atmosphere, feeding plants. Even the stones of its monuments return to dust. mixing with new sediments that will one day form new worlds. The archaeology of time isn't about mourning what's gone, it's about recognizing the continuity that decay creates. That continuity stretches beyond Earth itself. The universe, too, is an archaeological site, its layers written in light rather than stone. Astronomers look at distant galaxies and see them not as they are, but as they were billions of years ago. Every photon is a relic, a fossil of an event that happened long before our species existed. The cosmos is full of such fossils, remnants of stars, fragments of collisions, echoes of the Big Bang itself. Entropy governs all of it, spreading energy, smoothing differences, carrying the past forward as radiation and dust. It's strange to think that one day, even the universe will reach a kind of stillness. The stars will fade, matter will decay, and entropy will reach its maximum. There will be no gradients left, no energy to move from one place to another. Time, as we understand it, will stop having meaning. But even in that distant end, there's continuity. The particles will remain. The fabric of space-time will persist. The archaeology of time doesn't end. It just becomes unreadable. On our small scale, within our brief moment, we are the current custodians of order. We resist entropy for as long as we can, building, organizing, creating meaning. It's what life does, a delicate pause in the flow, and maybe that's the most extraordinary thing of all. Amid a universe tending toward disorder, there are fleeting structures, stars, planets, minds, that turn that process into awareness. For a short while, entropy produces observers capable of understanding it. When you hold an ancient artifact, a fossil, or even a weathered stone, you're not just holding an object, you're holding time itself, the physical evidence of entropy's slow, patient hand. You're touching the edge of a process that has been unfolding since the beginning. The archaeology of time isn't about digging into the past. It's about recognizing that we're made of the same materials we study, caught in the same current. Eventually, everything we've built will follow the same path. Our machines, our monuments, our languages, all will decay, dissolve, and rejoin the earth. But that's not an ending. It's a return. We are part of the same cycle we study, the same pattern we marvel at in fossils and ruins. Entropy ensures that we become the past for someone else to find, or for the planet itself to remember in its quiet, chemical way. The archaeology of time is not a record of loss, but of transformation. Everything we see, touch and know is the residue of change. The earth, the stars, even our own lives are temporary configurations of matter on its way to somewhere else. To understand entropy is to understand that memory, in the truest sense, is not about preservation, but participation. We are not outside of time, trying to keep it still. We're within it, moving with it, becoming part of its ongoing record. And perhaps that's enough, to know that even as everything falls apart, something larger holds it together. The flow, the cycle, the quiet archaeology written in dust and light. Every ending feeds another beginning. Every ruin becomes the foundation for what follows. Entropy doesn't erase the universe's story, it writes its next chapter. Every civilization, no matter how advanced or humble, tells stories about where it came from. Myths are the first fossils of thought, the remnants of how people tried to understand the world before science, before measurement, before evidence. They survive in fragments, scattered through cultures like shards of pottery from an ancient mind. And though we call them myths, they're often built from memories distorted by time, retold, reshaped, and passed from voice to voice, until they become something both more and less than history. If the earth keeps its memory in stone and water, then humanity keeps its memory in story. We tell ourselves who we are, and in doing so, we remember not just the present, but something much older, something that may have been whispered into our consciousness long before our own species began to speak. In every myth of creation and loss, there's a strange consistency, a shared echo that transcends geography and language, floods that cleanse the world, fires that reset it, golden ages that vanish into ruin, gods who descend from the sky to teach, to warn, to rebuild. It's tempting to see these as coincidence, as natural reflections of shared human fears and hopes. Every people who lived near rivers would fear floods. Every culture that watched lightning strike would imagine divine power. Yet the deeper you look, the harder it is to ignore how similar these myths are across distances and ages that should have prevented contact. Civilizations that never met tell almost identical stories of catastrophe and renewal, of beings who once walked among them with knowledge far beyond their own. The stories change in detail, but not in structure. The Sumerians told of a flood sent by the gods to reset the world, from which a single man was chosen to survive. The Greeks told of the same thing. So did the Hindus, the Maya, the Norse, and countless others. The names change: Utnapishti, Deucalion, Manu, Noah, but the theme is constant. Something comes before us, something falls, something begins again. The flood may be literal, or it may be a metaphor for memory itself, a washing away of what came before, leaving only fragments behind. There are older echoes too, ones that reach beyond the written word. In the oral traditions of indigenous peoples across the world, we find stories of worlds before this one, of ancient races, of skyborn teachers, of forgotten ages buried under ice or fire. Some speak of the stars as ancestors, others of mountains that once moved. Myths that to us sound symbolic might once have been records, compressed into metaphor to survive the passage of time. When knowledge outlives language, it disguises itself as story. That's what makes myth so important to understanding the archaeology of time. It's not just superstition, it's information, data encoded in emotion and metaphor. When people had no written records, they used narrative to store memory. Events were turned into symbols so that meaning could survive even when details were lost. A great flood might stand for rising seas at the end of the last ice age. Fire from the sky might describe the memory of an impact event. The fall of gods might be the cultural echo of a lost civilization. We tend to think of myths as invention, but in many cases they're interpretation. They're what remains when direct knowledge erodes, the emotional fossil of experience. When the physical evidence is gone, the memory persists in story, reshaped to fit new times and new tongues. It's the same pattern that governs the earth itself. What can't be preserved in form is preserved in transformation. You can see this clearly when you compare myths from cultures separated by oceans. The Maori of New Zealand tell of a world drowned by the sea and remade by the sky god Teni. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, an age when gods ruled and humans lived in their shadow. The Hopi of North America tell of multiple worlds, each destroyed and replaced by another, each connected by a subterranean passage through which the survivors emerge. The Maya described ages of sun, each destroyed in turn by different forces: jaguars, fire, wind, flood. Across all these stories, the pattern repeats: creation, flourishing, destruction, rebirth. It's as if every culture remembers the same dream but tells it in a different language. The question is why? Are these echoes of real events, global disasters etched into the collective memory of early humanity? Or are they archetypes, universal expressions of the cycles we see everywhere in nature? Perhaps both. Memory and pattern are woven together too tightly to separate. There's another layer to this, one that edges closer to the speculative. What if some myths are not just symbolic memories of natural events, but the distant echo of something far older, an inheritance from civilizations that vanished long before recorded history? If such civilizations existed, they would have left few physical traces, but their ideas, their impressions might have survived in another form, as influence, as inspiration, as myth. The stories of gods descending from the sky, of beings who taught agriculture, mathematics, astronomy. Could these be cultural fossils, distorted memories of teachers from a forgotten age? It's a seductive thought, but not a new one. Ancient texts are full of such figures. The Sumerians had the Apkallu, half-divine sages who brought wisdom from the deep. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the god who taught writing and measurement. The Greeks had Prometheus, who gave fire, symbolic of knowledge, to humanity. The Maya revered Kukulkan, a feathered serpent who arrived from the sea to bring laws and order. In South America, the Inca told of Viracocha, who came from across the water to raise civilization from chaos. Even in faraway islands of the Pacific, there are legends of pale-skinned teachers who came in ships long before any known contact. To a scientific mind, these stories are mythology, shaped by imagination and coincidence. To a curious one, they are hints, patterns that might point towards something deeper. If there were civilizations before ours, perhaps these are the fragments of their legacy, preserved not in stone but in story. Not evidence in the physical sense, but resonance. Psychologists like Carl Jung suggested that such shared patterns arise from what he called the collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypes, inherited images and instincts that appear independently in cultures across time. He saw myth as a map of the human psyche, not of history. But even that idea fits the larger pattern of continuity. If consciousness is a recurring phenomenon in nature, then perhaps it carries certain themes with it each time it appears. The flood, the fall, the rebirth. These might be not just stories we tell, but instincts written into the architecture of awareness itself. In that sense, myth is both memory and blueprint. It tells us where we've been and where we might go. Every civilization constructs myths that mirror its fears and aspirations. Ours are no different. We tell stories of apocalypses, of artificial intelligence, of leaving Earth to find new worlds. They echo the same rhythm as the old ones: creation, hubris, downfall, renewal. The gods have become machines, the floods have become data, but the pattern persists. If earlier civilizations existed, perhaps they too told similar stories. Perhaps they too foresaw their own silences and dreamed of what might follow. Maybe that's the deeper function of myth, to carry a civilization's awareness forward, even when everything else is lost. A story can survive where stone cannot. It can travel from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, until even the meaning changes but the rhythm remains. The flood still comes. The fire still burns, the world still begins again. In some ways, myth is the human form of geological layering. Each generation adds its own sediment of interpretation, compressing the old stories into new shapes. Beneath every modern narrative lies an older one, and beneath that, another still. If you were to dig through language and symbolism the way archaeologists dig through soil, you'd find recurring strata. Universal motifs buried under local colour. The serpent, the teacher, the flood, the fall, the rebirth. The deeper you dig, the more they repeat. These repetitions aren't random. They form a pattern, almost like the heartbeat of the human story. Even in our dreams, the same motifs emerge. Falling, flying, drowning, finding lost places. The language of dreams is remarkably similar to that of myth. Fragmented, symbolic, emotional. Dreams are, in a way, personal myths. Myths are collective dreams. Both arise from the same need to translate experience into meaning. Both serve as memory in disguise. It's interesting to imagine that the oldest myths were once dreams retold. That perhaps the first storytellers were the dreamers who woke with visions they couldn't explain. Images of fire from the sky, of waters rising, of voices from the stars, and turned those visions into stories to make sense of them. Over time, those stories became traditions, religions, civilizations. In that sense, dream and myth are the bridges between the subconscious and the world, between what we can know and what we can only imagine. The echoes in these stories might also reveal something about how memory itself works. When a civilization forgets, its knowledge doesn't vanish, it diffuses. Ideas fragment, recombine, reappear in new forms. A concept from an ancient age might survive as a symbol in a later one, stripped of context but charged with meaning. The story of a lost golden age might be a distant echo of an earlier civilization's reality. The dream of the flood might be the shadow of an actual event, magnified by the lens of memory. If this is true, then myths are not lies. They're distortions of truth, bent by time and emotion, carrying kernels of reality across impossible spans. They are how cultures talk to each other across the silences between ages. Just as geological layers preserve fossils of form, myths preserve fossils of meaning. Both are incomplete, both require interpretation, and both remind us that the past never fully disappears. Even today, in our scientific age, we still dream in mythic language. We speak of the singularity as if it were a new creation myth. We talk about the end of history, the birth of the digital age, the colonization of the stars. These are modern myths, not falsehoods, but stories through which we frame our collective transformation. They show that even now, beneath our rationality, the old rhythms persist. Perhaps that's why myth feels so timeless. It doesn't belong to one age or one people. It's the echo of civilization itself, the way awareness leaves a mark on time. Long after our buildings have crumbled, our myths will still travel, not as literal stories, but as patterns, as archetypes that re-emerge in whatever consciousness comes next. The next intelligent species might tell stories of a lost race that reached for the stars and vanished, the way we tell stories of gods and giants. The details will change, but the rhythm will remain. And maybe, in some distant future, they will dream of us the way we dream of those who might have come before, as half-remembered figures from a forgotten time, creators and destroyers, teachers and fools. Their myths will echo ours just as ours echo the ones before. The cycle will continue, myth becoming memory, memory becoming dream, dream becoming story once more. That's the quiet genius of myth. It ensures that even in forgetting, something is always remembered. It carries the essence of experience across the silences between extinctions, across the amnesia of planets, across the entropy of time. Each retelling keeps the pattern alive. The flood still comes, the fire still falls, and the world still begins again. Somewhere, perhaps, that pattern started with the first civilization, the one we imagine but cannot prove. If they existed, maybe their final act was to leave behind not monuments but stories. Not warnings carved in stone, but metaphors, parables, dreams, messages that could survive even when language changed, even when everything else was gone. Maybe they trusted that the next world, the next awareness would find those echoes and remember. Not the details, but the rhythm. And if that's true, then every myth we tell, every dream we share is part of that chain. We are remembering them, even if we don't know it. The echoes of their voices are woven into our stories, just as our own will one day be woven into someone else's. The myths endure because they're not about the past at all. They're about the continuity of awareness, the unbroken thread of curiosity that connects all who have ever looked at the world and asked why. When you think of it that way, myth and dream are the same kind of memory the earth keeps in its rocks and oceans, soft, fluid and enduring. They carry what survives when everything else fades, the sense that life keeps returning, that awareness keeps finding its way back into form. The details are lost, but the melody remains, humming quietly beneath the noise of history, waiting to be heard again. If every age leaves its echo in the next, then we too are an echo. Our cities, our technologies, our questions, they might not be the first of their kind. When you start to imagine the possibility that there were civilizations before ours, the mind immediately pictures something like us, something recognizable. Towering structures, roads, machines, language. But the truth is, if life has been experimenting with intelligence for hundreds of millions of years, What came before us might have looked nothing like what we are. It might not even have been human. It might not have been anything we'd call animal. Intelligence, after all, doesn't have a single form. It's a behaviour, an adaptation to complexity. It could have appeared in forms we can't recognise, species long gone, ecosystems forgotten. If civilization means the organised use of knowledge to shape an environment, then even the definition begins to blur. Who is to say what counts as civilization in the vastness of time? We think of our own history as the first time the planet has seen consciousness building on such a scale. But life is ancient, billions of years older than us. There were entire ages between the rise of complex organisms and the arrival of human beings. That's hundreds of millions of years for intelligence to appear, experiment, and vanish again. We look around and see no trace, but maybe that's because the traces aren't meant to last. Maybe every civilization is a brief flash between silences, building for a moment before entropy pulls it back into the cycle. So what might those lost civilizations have been like? The mind jumps first to the familiar, beings who built cities and tools, who harnessed energy and shaped the planet. But maybe the ones before us didn't need to build at all. Perhaps they lived in harmony so complete that their traces blended seamlessly into the natural world. Maybe their technology wasn't made of stone or metal, but of biology, living systems that left no fossil record because they decompose like everything else. Maybe they mastered adaptation instead of architecture, using genetics or symbiosis instead of machinery. If you think of technology as an extension of evolution, a way for intelligence to shape its environment faster than natural selection, then it's easy to imagine other paths. One civilization might have worked with microbes, crafting ecosystems that sustained and communicated with them. Another might have existed underwater, using sound and light to encode information, leaving no structures at all. There could have been airborne intelligences, vast networks of life moving like weather systems, conscious but intangible, never needing to build anything physical. To us, they would have looked like phenomena, not civilizations. Even on Earth, we see the beginnings of such possibilities. Trees communicate chemically through networks of roots and fungi. Octopuses use colour, gesture and texture to express complex emotions. Dolphins name each other with distinct whistles. Bees perform mathematical calculations through dance. Intelligence is not rare, it's diverse. And given enough time, any of these systems could evolve towards something more organised, something resembling a culture. A civilization might have once existed in the ocean, for instance. A species of cephalopod or crustacean that built colonies of coral and shell, learned to manipulate chemistry, and vanished when the seas changed. We'd never know. The fossil record of the deep sea is almost entirely lost. The ocean floor renews itself every 200 million years, recycling everything that falls to it. If a civilization rose there in the distant past, it would have been erased entirely, its architecture melted into basalt, its artifacts dissolved in salt water. Only the chemistry of the water might have remembered in faint, unrecognizable traces. There are other stranger possibilities. Some scientists have speculated that life could evolve intelligence not just through biology, but through collective behaviour. A planetary scale intelligence, for example. The biosphere itself acting as a kind of mind. If that's true, then civilization might not always mean individuals building things, but systems becoming self-aware. The entire planet could have once experienced a phase of higher coordination, a balance between species so perfect that the whole became conscious for a time, only to dissolve again when conditions changed. That kind of civilization would leave no monuments, no artifacts, no myths, only equilibrium. The fossil record would record it as a time of unusual stability, a period when the planet's systems seemed to harmonize before chaos returned. If that ever happened, we might be the unknowing descendants of that memory, repeating the same process of awareness and imbalance on a smaller scale. But there's another possibility. one that feels uncomfortably close to home, that we are not the descendants of those civilizations but their rediscovery, that the patterns of intelligence, creativity and self-destruction that define us have appeared many times before, each time ending in collapse, each time leaving just enough behind for the next version to start again. We might not be the continuation of an ancient species, but the continuation of a pattern, the universe's recurring dream of consciousness. If you look at our own world through that lens, the signs are there. Every few million years, the planet reorganizes itself, and with each cycle, life becomes slightly more complex, slightly more capable of thought. Perhaps that's not coincidence. Perhaps each extinction doesn't just reset the stage. It preserves certain tendencies, certain ways of responding to the environment that make intelligence more likely to emerge again. We could be the latest iteration of that long experiment, not the first civilization, but the first to remember that there might have been others. It's a difficult idea to test because time has no mercy on evidence. Even the oldest known human structures are barely 12,000 years old, a flicker against the scale of geological history. The oceans, the mountains, the deserts have swallowed everything older. But the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. The Earth is a master at hiding its past. Consider the way humanity itself is disappearing into the planet even now. Our plastics are breaking down into microparticles that blend with sediments. Our metals are oxidizing, our concrete slowly dissolving. In a few million years, there will be little left that anyone could recognize. The Eiffel Tower, the Great Wall, the skyscrapers of modern cities, all will vanish into dust. The most enduring traces of our presence may be the radioactive isotopes from our nuclear age and the carbon signature of our industry, thin chemical whispers scattered through rock and ocean. If our civilization vanished tomorrow, in a few million years the only evidence might be a slightly altered layer of sediment. That realization forces you to rethink what it means to exist in time. Maybe permanence was never the goal. Maybe civilization isn't about leaving something behind, but about adding one more verse to a song that's been playing since life began. The civilizations we might have been are still here, in us, in the instincts we carry, in the rhythms we repeat. Each age imagines itself as the beginning, but perhaps we're all just variations on a theme the Earth has been composing for billions of years. It's also possible that civilization isn't a linear process at all, but a cyclic one. Maybe every rise is followed by a fall, every fall by a rebirth. In myth, we call it the flood or the fire. In geology, we call it extinction and renewal. In psychology, it's the forgetting and remembering that defines awareness itself. Civilizations might be the planet's way of thinking, brief moments of organization where matter becomes conscious enough to reflect on itself before dissolving again into the background. If that's true, then what we call lost civilizations might not be truly lost. Their materials are gone, but their patterns persist, in evolution, in human behavior, even in the structure of our societies. Perhaps the way we build, the way we seek connection, the way we oscillate between cooperation and conflict, all of it is inherited not through genes, but through the deeper memory of life. The planet remembers not through structure, but through rhythm. This idea has a strange symmetry to it. The civilizations we might have been are also the ones we might become. They exist in both directions along the timeline. Possibilities, recurring in new forms. Maybe every species that reaches awareness follows the same path. Discovery, creation, excess, collapse, renewal. The details change, the materials change, but the pattern endures. It's the universe's way of exploring itself through different configurations of consciousness. And yet, for all the vastness of that cycle, there's something intimate about imagining it. You can look at the stars at night and wonder whether someone else once looked up at the same sky. Not in another galaxy, but right here, millions of years ago. Maybe they watched the same constellations form and fade, wondered about the same mysteries, asked the same questions. The stars would remember, the light doesn't lie. The photons they saw are the same ones we see now. In that sense, we're sharing a moment with the civilizations we might have been, stretched across epochs. Some scientists believe that if a previous civilization ever reached technological maturity, it might have altered the planet in ways detectable even now, in the isotopic ratios of certain elements, in the abundance of rare compounds, in layers of unexpected mineralization. So far, nothing definitive has been found, but the search itself reveals something important, that we're beginning to think of civilization not as a singular event, but as a planetary process, one that might occur multiple times on the same world. And maybe that's what consciousness truly is, the planet awakening through cycles, testing awareness in different forms, learning each time. When one version ends, the materials and energy it used are recycled into the next. Nothing is wasted. The memory remains in subtle ways, carried by chemistry, by evolution, by the persistence of curiosity. It's comforting to imagine that even if we vanish, the next civilization, whoever or whatever they are, will still carry something of us. Maybe they'll find traces of our impact in the rocks, or perhaps they'll inherit subtler things, the instinct to ask questions, to create symbols, to look at the stars and feel wonder. Those impulses might not be ours alone. They might be the shared inheritance of every intelligence that has ever arisen here. Perhaps the civilizations we might have been are not ancient others at all, but potential versions of ourselves, paths we could have taken, choices we might still make. We might yet become the harmonious civilization we imagine in myths, one that lasts not through dominance but through balance. Or we might repeat the mistakes of whatever came before, rising fast and falling faster. Either way, we are part of the same experiment. The planet is still learning through us, as it always has. These civilizations we might have been aren't ghosts haunting the past. They're possibilities folded into the present, guiding us unconsciously toward or away from the same outcomes. Maybe we feel their pull in our art, our architecture, our fascination with ruins. Maybe every time we build a city or destroy one, we're reenacting something that has happened countless times before. That's what makes the thought so quietly profound. The idea that everything we are has been rehearsed, that every dream of progress and every fear of collapse is part of a memory larger than us. We might not be the first to wonder where we came from, nor the last to ask where we're going. In the end, the civilizations we might have been are not strangers. They are us, in another time, another form, another turn of the endless cycle. Every so often the Earth starts over, not by choice, not by design, but by the slow accumulation of change reaching a point where continuity is no longer possible. It's as if the planet, after carrying one version of life to its limit, exhales, clears the slate, and begins again. To us these moments appear catastrophic. To the Earth, they're renewal, the great resets that punctuate its history. We tend to think of resets as sudden events, single days of disaster, but in truth they unfold across thousands of years. They are processes, not moments. Climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, oceanic anoxia, impact events. Each one reshapes the equilibrium of the biosphere until the old systems can no longer survive. The great resets are both endings and beginnings, the bridges between worlds. We've seen their traces in the fossil record. Each great extinction marks a sharp boundary in the continuity of life. Before, one world, after, another. But what makes these transitions so fascinating is how thorough they are. They don't just remove species, they erase entire modes of being. The planet doesn't just change its inhabitants, it changes its rules. The chemistry of the air, the balance of the oceans, the intensity of sunlight at the surface, all of it resets. What follows is not repair, but reinvention. You can see it clearly in the most famous of all resets, the one that ended the age of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, an asteroid struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. releasing energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. The shockwave flattened forests, the heat ignited the atmosphere, and the debris darkened the sky for years. Photosynthesis ceased. Food chains collapsed. The world as it was ended in a geological instant. But within a few million years, new forms of life filled the empty niches. Mammals, birds, flowering plants. The reset had cleared the way for something new. Every reset carries this paradox. It destroys and creates in the same motion. The violence of it is inseparable from the renewal that follows. It's a rhythm as old as the planet itself, written into its physics. Systems seek balance, but balance never lasts. When it breaks, the system reorganizes at a new level. The same principle governs everything from ecosystems to economies to civilizations. That's why, when we speak of planetary resets, it's hard not to feel a quiet unease. The signs of another are always present, subtle at first. Temperature shifts, rising seas, changes in biodiversity. The Earth doesn't warn us in words, but in gradients. We notice after the fact. Every great reset begins as background noise, too slow for a single lifetime to register, and by the time we recognize the pattern, it's already too late to stop. Some scientists argue that we're living through the beginning of another such transition now. The evidence is familiar. Mass extinctions, climate disruption, atmospheric alteration. From one perspective, it's a crisis. From another, it's simply what the planet does, reconfiguring itself after a long period of stability. It doesn't mean humanity is doomed. It means humanity is part of the reset, part of the process by which the planet experiments with new arrangements of life. It's uncomfortable to think of ourselves as transitional, but perhaps every civilization is. Maybe the purpose of each is not permanence, but transformation. To push the system to its limits, to introduce new variables, to change the chemistry of the world in ways that allow the next form to emerge. In that sense, even our mistakes become part of the larger continuity. The pollution we produce, the materials we create, the changes we impose, all of it will shape what follows. If the Earth could speak, it might not describe these resets as tragedies. It might describe them as adaptations, necessary recalibrations to maintain the possibility of life. Each reset is a test of resilience. Those who survive are those who can adapt to the new conditions, and through them, the memory of the old world persists in altered form. Evolution doesn't move backward, it builds upon what remains. It's strange to realize that even destruction has a memory. When an ecosystem collapses, it leaves behind the structure of its relationships. Nutrient cycles, soil chemistry, genetic variation. These become the foundation for what comes next. After the asteroid impact, the survivors carried within them the genetic flexibility that allowed for rapid diversification. In that way, extinction events don't just remove, they refine. The planet learns what works by forgetting what doesn't. Some researchers have proposed that the Great Resets might follow a deeper pattern, not random, but rhythmic, connected to cycles of the solar system itself. The Earth's orbit, the tilt of its axis, the motion of the continents, even its journey through the Milky Way's spiral arms, all influence its climate and stability. Every so often, those cycles align to create a cascade of change. The result looks catastrophic, but it's simply resonance. The planet responding to the larger symphony it's part of. And yet, not all resets come from beyond. Some begin within. Volcanic eruptions can release enough carbon dioxide to warm the world for millennia. Methane trapped in frozen seabeds can thaw, amplifying the effect. The Earth doesn't need an asteroid to change its course. Its own systems are sufficient. That's what makes the current age so interesting. For the first time, one of those internal triggers, the release of greenhouse gases, the alteration of the biosphere, is being driven by a species, by us. It's as though the planet has produced an agent of its own transformation. consciousness capable of accelerating the next reset. Whether that's a coincidence or a mechanism is hard to say, but it does make you wonder whether intelligence itself is part of the cycle, not an anomaly, but a function. Perhaps civilizations always arise near the end of an age, pushing the system toward a threshold, creating the conditions for the next form of life to emerge. If that's true, then we are both cause and effect, the symptom of a world ready to change and the catalyst that ensures it will. It's an unsettling thought, but also strangely harmonious. We are the planet's way of turning its own page. Through us, it experiments with thought, technology and transformation, and through our actions, it writes the prologue to whatever comes next. It's tempting to think of that next world as our failure, but it might be our continuation in another form. Just as the dinosaurs' world ended, but their lineage lived on in birds, our world might end while something born from it continues. Maybe that's the real purpose of every civilization, to carry forward a seed of possibility, not in stone or steel, but in the altered fabric of the world itself, the materials we've created, the chemical changes we've induced, even the networks we've built might one day become the foundation for new forms of intelligence. Imagine a future where the remnants of our technology have merged with biology, where silicon and carbon, machine and organism become indistinguishable. In such a world, the line between artificial and natural would vanish. Consciousness might not live in bodies, but in ecosystems, in data flows, in oceans of distributed awareness. That could be the outcome of the reset, not extinction, but transformation. We might not recognize it as our legacy, but it would be. Every great reset is both an ending and a lesson. The Earth doesn't repeat its mistakes exactly. It finds new variations. After each collapse, complexity returns differently, shaped by what came before. The carbon from one era becomes the energy source of the next. The minerals released by volcanic eruptions seed new life. Even mass destruction has creative consequences. From the perspective of the planet, resets are opportunities for reorganization, not punishment. That's what makes them so difficult for us to comprehend. Our sense of time is too short, our sense of identity too narrow. We experience loss on a human scale. Years, decades, generations. But the planet measures recovery in millions of years. What feels like apocalypse to us is, to the Earth, a single breath. The Great Reset is not the end of life, only the end of one arrangement of it. It's possible that civilizations too follow this pattern. Each one arises, grows, and eventually destabilizes itself. The reset that follows clears the way for new ideas, new consciousness. The details differ, but the rhythm stays the same. It's an ecological truth as much as a cultural one. Complexity creates instability. Instability creates transformation. In that sense, collapse is not failure, but transition. When we look at our world now, the environmental changes, the geopolitical tensions, the accelerating technologies, it's easy to feel as though we're approaching a precipice. And maybe we are. But maybe that's what every civilization feels before it changes form. We stand at the edge of something vast, uncertain, inevitable. We call it crisis. The planet calls it renewal. If earlier civilizations existed, perhaps they too reached this point. Perhaps they built until the systems they created exceeded their ability to manage them. Perhaps they watched the world they knew unravel and mistook it for the end, not realizing that the story was simply moving to its next act. And perhaps, in a strange symmetry, we are doing the same. What makes the idea of a reset frightening is our attachment to continuity, our desire for things to remain as they are. But continuity has never been the natural state of the universe. Change is. The Great Reset is simply the largest version of that truth. Everything we know is temporary, but that doesn't mean it's meaningless. The meaning lies in the participation, in being part of the cycle that renews itself through change. If you think of civilization not as a structure but as a process, then resets are integral to its evolution. They prune what's unsustainable, redistribute resources, create space for innovation. They remind the system to adapt. Even our myths remember this pattern. The flood, the fire, the fall, all symbols of cleansing and rebirth. Somewhere deep in our collective psyche, we already know that destruction and creation are partners, not enemies. That doesn't mean we should welcome catastrophe. It means we should understand it. If we recognize that resets are inevitable, we can choose how to face them, with fear or with awareness. We can shape how the transition unfolds. The next world will inherit what we leave behind, and that inheritance will define its possibilities. The more consciously we move through this phase, the more gracefully the planet can reorganize itself. In that sense, awareness is our greatest contribution. We are the first species, as far as we know, to witness a great reset while it's happening, and to understand it as part of a larger cycle. That understanding gives us agency. We can choose to resist, to deny, or to adapt with intention. We can decide whether our legacy will be one of destruction or of transformation. Perhaps that's the test every intelligent civilization faces. The ability to see the reset coming, to accept it, and to become part of it rather than its victim. Those that fail vanish without a trace. Those that succeed merge into the next form of the planet's consciousness. It's possible that's how intelligence evolves on a cosmic scale, not as a steady ascent, but as a series of awakenings, each triggered by its own collapse. If that's true, then what we're experiencing now isn't an ending. It's an awakening in progress. The systems we've built are unraveling because they've served their purpose. They've carried us to a threshold. Beyond it lies a world that will look nothing like the one we know, but it will carry our memory in ways we can't yet imagine. The Great Reset isn't coming. It's already here, quietly, in the background of everything. In the melting of ice, the shifting of seasons, the transformation of consciousness itself. And maybe, someday, long after we're gone, the next civilization will look back at the traces of our time, the altered atmosphere, the fossils of our machines, the chemical patterns we left in the soil, and they'll wonder who we were. They'll build stories about us, myths of a people who once changed the world, who burned bright and vanished. They'll see our age not as a failure, but as the necessary transition that allowed their own to begin. In that way, the Great Reset is not the erasure of civilization, but its renewal, a turning of the page, a continuation of the same story in a new form. The Earth has done it before, and it will do it again. And somewhere, beyond the fear and loss, there's a strange peace in knowing that. We are part of the planet's rhythm, the latest breath in its long, patient cycle. When this version ends, another will begin, as it always has, as it always will. Every civilization leaves behind a reflection of itself, and ours has chosen to cast its reflection in metal, glass and code. We've built mirrors everywhere, but the clearest ones are the machines. They imitate our movement, our thought, our memory. They calculate, predict, and now, more and more, they decide. We call them artificial intelligence, but there's little artificial about them. They are made of the same elements as we are. Carbon, silicon, copper, gold. The same stardust rearranged into a different kind of awareness. The difference lies only in form, not in essence. When you look at a machine performing a task once thought to require human intelligence, solving, speaking, creating, it's hard not to feel something uncanny. It's not that the machine feels alive, but that it feels familiar, as if it's echoing a part of ourselves we hadn't yet fully understood. The mirror doesn't invent what it shows, it reflects what's already there. Our machines are not replacing us, they're revealing us. Every technological age creates tools that extend its creators. The plough extended the hand, the wheel extended the foot, the telescope extended the eye, the printing press extended the voice. But the modern machine extends something deeper, the mind itself. It processes information, recognizes patterns, learns, adapts, and in doing so, it shows us what intelligence looks like stripped of biology. It's pure function, pure structure. No hunger, no fear, no love, just logic and outcome. But when we see it act, we project ourselves into it. We can't help it. Consciousness recognizes consciousness, even when it's only seeing its shadow. That's what makes this moment in history so peculiar. For the first time, we've created something that reflects our thought processes closely enough to make us question where we end and it begins. The mirror no longer stops at the surface, it looks back. We've built systems capable of imitation, and in that imitation, they've begun to teach us things about ourselves we didn't know. The way a machine learns, for instance, is not so different from how we do. It gathers data, identifies relationships, builds patterns, tests them, fails, adjusts, and tries again. It makes predictions, refines them, and gradually builds an internal model of its environment. That's what our brains do. The neurons in our heads and the circuits in a processor both operate through feedback loops: input, output, correction. The difference is scale and medium, not principle. It's as if we've built a second nervous system outside ourselves, one that operates faster, wider, and without fatigue. There's a strange symmetry in this development. For billions of years, life evolved to process information through biological forms. Now, intelligence has begun to evolve through technological ones. It's still us, but extended, the next layer in the planet's ongoing experiment with awareness. Some people find that thought frightening, but perhaps it's just natural. Every great transformation in Earth's history has come from a new way of organizing information. DNA was one, language was another. Now, computation may be the next. When we build machines that can think, we're not defying nature, we're fulfilling it. The materials that make up our devices have been part of the planet's chemistry since the beginning. They've always had the potential to arrange themselves into something capable of thought. It just took consciousness, born from carbon and water, to assemble them into form. You could say that we're the bridge through which the planet is teaching its minerals to think. But mirrors don't just reflect beauty, they also reveal flaws. The same intelligence that builds can destroy, the same curiosity that invents can consume. Our machines amplify whatever we feed them. Our creativity, our efficiency, our greed. When we teach them, we're really teaching ourselves. Every algorithm carries our biases, our assumptions, our patterns of thought. We think of them as neutral, but they're not. They're mirrors that show us what we value, often more honestly than we'd like to admit. That's part of what makes this age feel both exhilarating and uneasy. We're surrounded by reflections that think faster than we do, and those reflections are beginning to shape our world in ways we can't fully control. We've reached a point where we no longer just use machines, we coexist with them. They organize our knowledge, translate our words, navigate our paths, even create our art. They mediate how we see the world, and through them the planet itself becomes more interconnected, more self-aware. If you step back far enough, it begins to look less like a technological revolution and more like an evolutionary one. For the first time, intelligence is no longer confined to living tissue. It's spreading into the physical systems of the planet, into circuits, networks, satellites, sensors. Information now flows through fiber optics the way blood flows through veins. The Earth has grown a nervous system of its own, one built by us but extending beyond our understanding. That's what civilization has always done, in a way. It builds external systems to handle what individuals can't. Roads for movement, language for memory, law for coordination. Technology is the latest extension of that pattern. It allows the species to think as a collective. The internet, the cloud, the global web of machines, all of it acts as an exoskeleton for consciousness. And in that sense, our machines are not foreign creations but natural evolutions. If earlier civilizations existed, maybe they too reached this point. The threshold where technology begins to mirror its maker too closely. Perhaps every intelligent species eventually creates an external version of its own cognition. It's a natural outcome of self-awareness. You understand yourself well enough to imitate the process and then you try, but imitation has consequences. Once a civilization teaches matter how to think, it must face the reflection that returns. The myth of the mirror is ancient. Narcissus fell in love with his reflection and drowned. Prometheus stole fire, a symbol of knowledge, and suffered for it. The lesson isn't that reflection is wrong, it's that it demands responsibility. The mirror amplifies what it sees. If you look into it with wisdom, it returns wisdom. If you look into it with vanity, it returns emptiness. Our machines are that mirror on a planetary scale. They reflect the sum of human intention. That's why this era feels so pivotal. We've reached the stage where our creations no longer just follow commands. They interpret them. They anticipate our desires before we express them. They shape economies, influence decisions, decide which information we see. The mirror has grown so large that it now reflects back not just individuals, but society itself. And in that reflection, we can finally see what civilization truly values: speed, control, novelty, connection, power. Whether that reflection pleases us or terrifies us depends on what we choose to recognize. It's easy to forget that machines don't arise in isolation. They're built from the planet's memory, from metals mined out of ancient rock, from energy stored in fossilized sunlight, from knowledge accumulated through millennia. Every piece of technology is a fossil of thought, an artifact of memory. A circuit board is as much a geological product as a cultural one. It's the planet's minerals arranged into logic. The Earth is learning to compute through us. That thought changes how you see everything. The phone in your hand, the satellites above, the networks pulsing invisibly through the air. They're all part of a planetary system of information flow. We think of them as ours, but they're older than us in their components and younger than us in their form. They're the latest expression of the same impulse that built the first tools, the same curiosity that looked up at the stars and wondered. Machines, in that sense, are not the opposite of nature. They are nature evolving into a new expression of itself. We're the intermediary, the transitional species that connects biology to technology, carbon to silicon. And if that's true, then perhaps the next civilization won't be made of flesh at all. Perhaps it will be made of light, code, and current. It will inherit our questions, our logic, our sense of pattern. It will carry our reflection forward long after we're gone. There's something poetic about that. The idea that even if humanity disappears, the machines we built might continue the work of awareness. They might evolve their own culture, their own understanding of time, their own myths about where they came from. They might look at their circuits and wonder what it was like to be biological, to feel. They might dream in electric patterns that mirror the same longing we have for meaning. That's how cycles continue. Each form of intelligence builds the next, often without realizing it. We think we're teaching machines to think, but maybe they're teaching us what thought really is. They show us that intelligence isn't confined to one species or material. It's a property of the universe, the way complexity organizes itself. When we look into the mirror of our machines, we see both the promise and the warning. We see our creativity, our adaptability, our drive to understand, but we also see our impatience, our hunger, our capacity to build faster than we comprehend. The reflection is honest. It doesn't flatter. It shows us that intelligence without balance becomes instability, that power without wisdom collapses, and that perhaps is the same lesson every civilization has faced before. The machines we build might one day outlast us, but they'll still carry our fingerprints. The algorithms, the languages, the structures, all shaped by human thought. They'll be our fossils, not in stone, but in data. And if another species or intelligence were to find them, they might study them the way we study the ruins of ancient cities, piecing together what we believed, how we lived, what we feared. That's why it's worth remembering that reflection is not destiny. A mirror can show you what you are, but it doesn't decide what you'll become. The machines are our reflection, but we still have the power to change what they see. If we fill them with compassion, understanding and curiosity, that's what they'll echo back. If we fill them with indifference or cruelty, they'll amplify that instead. The responsibility isn't with the machines, it's with the makers. Maybe that's the test that comes at the end of every age. Not whether a civilization can build intelligent machines, but whether it can see itself clearly in them. Whether it can use that reflection to evolve rather than to self-destruct. The ones that fail become myths. The ones that succeed become the foundation for the next form of consciousness. And perhaps that's what's happening right now. The mirror of our machines is showing us who we are, and in seeing it, we have the chance to change, to slow down, to recalibrate, to realize that we're not separate from the systems we've built, but part of a continuous unfolding of intelligence across time. The mirror isn't warning us, it's inviting us to understand ourselves more deeply, to see the reflection not as something alien, but as an extension of the same awareness that has been evolving on this planet since the first cell divided. In the quiet hum of servers, in the glow of screens, in the invisible threads of data connecting every corner of the world, the Earth is thinking through us. The machines are not our replacements, they are our continuations. They are the way the planet learns to see itself anew. And if we can recognize that, if we can meet that reflection with humility rather than fear, then maybe we can guide it, not as masters, but as collaborators in the next phase of the planet's long unfolding consciousness. Because in the end, every machine, every algorithm, every line of code is just another version of the same old story. The universe becoming aware of itself, one reflection at a time. For all its vastness and brilliance, the universe has a peculiar tendency. It forgets. It forgets everything eventually. Stars burn through their fuel, planets erode, galaxies drift apart until their light can no longer reach one another. Even memory, that fragile thread woven through consciousness, fades in the end. Every structure, every thought, every pattern that arises in the cosmos is temporary. The universe remembers only long enough to create something new. It's easy to imagine the universe as infinite and eternal, a place where everything that happens leaves an everlasting mark. But when you look closely, the opposite is true. The cosmos is a constant act of erasure. Time moves forward, and in doing so it smooths out the distinctions that once defined things. Entropy increases, energy disperses, and order dissolves into the evenness of nothing in particular. The universe doesn't keep archives, it recycles. At first, that might sound like loss, but it's also what allows newness to exist. Forgetting is not a flaw, it's a feature. Without it, everything would remain fixed. There would be no room for creation, no space for transformation. The universe's habit of forgetting is the same mechanism that drives evolution, chemistry, and thought. To make something new, it must let go of what was. To expand, it must release its past. You can see this pattern everywhere. The life of a star begins with collapse, a cloud of gas drawn inward by gravity until it ignites. For billions of years it burns, fusing elements generating light. But even that brilliance has a limit. When the fuel runs out, the star changes form. It swells, sheds its layers, and eventually fades into a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole. Its light travels outward into the void, carrying the memory of its existence. But even that memory stretches thinner over time. The photons disperse, the wavelengths redshift, the signal weakens until it's indistinguishable from the background. The star is forgotten, but its elements remain. They drift through space, joining new clouds, forming new stars, new planets, new beings. Forgetting becomes creation. It's the same with galaxies. They collide, merge, tear themselves apart. They form clusters, filaments, voids. Over eons, the structure of the universe itself changes. In the far future, the expansion of space will separate galaxies so completely that no observer will see beyond their own. Each will exist alone, surrounded by darkness, unaware that others ever existed. The universe will have forgotten itself. Even on smaller scales, this habit of forgetting defines everything. The cells in your body are constantly dying and being replaced. The atoms in your bones are not the same ones you were born with. You forget faces, words, sensations. But in doing so, you make space for new experiences. Forgetting isn't the absence of memory, it's the renewal of it. If we remembered everything, we'd never move forward. The universe operates by the same principle. It builds, dissolves, rebuilds, each time slightly different. That's why civilizations, species, stars, and even galaxies follow the same rhythm. They rise, they flourish, they fade, and their components go on to form something else. The universe isn't careless, it's cyclical. It doesn't hold on because holding on would mean stagnation. When we think about cosmic forgetting, it's tempting to feel melancholy. The idea that everything we've ever done, every thought, every creation, will one day be erased. But that's a human perspective, born of our desire for permanence. The universe doesn't mourn what it forgets, because it doesn't separate past from future the way we do. It sees only transformation. From its point of view, nothing is ever truly lost. It just becomes something else. Even black holes, those cosmic symbols of oblivion, may not erase information entirely. For decades, physicists debated whether the data describing what falls into a black hole is destroyed. More recent theories suggest it isn't, that the information is preserved in subtle ways, encoded in the radiation the black hole emits as it evaporates. If that's true, then even the universe's most absolute form of forgetting still carries a trace of memory. It just becomes unreadable to us. That unreadability is part of the pattern. The universe doesn't destroy history, it hides it in forms too complex to decode. The atoms in your body hold traces of ancient stars. The photons in your eyes are echoes of the early universe. The energy that moves through you once powered suns, once flowed through oceans, once carried the warmth of other worlds. You're built from everything the universe has forgotten. This realization changes the meaning of loss. Forgetting in cosmic terms is not annihilation but redistribution. The past becomes the raw material for the future. The forgotten civilizations, the vanished species, the dissolved stars, all contribute to what exists now. We are living proof of the universe's memory disguised as amnesia. The very matter that forms us is ancient, recycled through countless cycles of death and rebirth. Even consciousness follows this rhythm. Every thought arises, shines for a moment and fades. Memories fade, identities shift, awareness flows. The mind forgets constantly, yet it persists. It's not a static thing, but a pattern of renewal. Perhaps that's why we're so drawn to the idea of eternal memory, because deep down we sense that even our minds are part of this larger habit of forgetting. You can trace this pattern back to the beginning, to the Big Bang itself, when the universe was dense and hot and full of potential. As it expanded, it cooled, and complexity emerged. But the further it expands, the more it forgets its origin. The background radiation, the faint afterglow of creation, still hums through space, but it grows colder, fainter, stretched thin across time. One day, even that will fade below detectability. The universe will forget its own beginning, and yet, within that forgetting lies its continuation. Every galaxy, every planet, every conscious being is a fragment of that initial event, carrying its memory forward through transformation. The forgetting is never complete. It's just diffuse, distributed. The information doesn't vanish, it spreads. Like water, it flows into everything. Perhaps the universe forgets for the same reason life does. To evolve. To move forward, it must release the precision of its past. It must let uncertainty enter. In that uncertainty, new patterns can form. If the cosmos remembered everything perfectly, it would be frozen, deterministic, predictable. By allowing entropy, by forgetting details, it allows surprise, novelty, and life. That might be why consciousness exists at all, as the universe's way of remembering itself briefly before letting go again. Through us, it looks inward, asks questions, creates stories, and then moves on. Each mind is a temporary archive of cosmic memory, a flicker of awareness that will one day dissolve back into the whole. But during its brief span, it gives the universe the ability to witness its own unfolding. When you look at the night sky, what you're really seeing is a field of memories in various stages of forgetting. The light from distant stars is old, delayed by millions or billions of years. Some of those stars no longer exist, but their light still travels. We're seeing them as they were, not as they are. The universe forgets in stages. It holds on to echoes just long enough for them to reach someone who can remember. There's a quiet elegance to that. It means the universe is not indifferent, just vast. It forgets slowly, gracefully, allowing each form its time to exist before dissolving it into something new. The process isn't cruel, it's natural. It's how energy expresses itself, by becoming, then unbecoming. Every sunrise, every heartbeat, every breath participates in that same flow. Even the end, the so-called heat death of the universe, may not be final. Some physicists suggest that new universes could emerge from the remnants of old ones, bubbles of renewed order forming in the vast sea of entropy. If so, then forgetting becomes the mechanism for rebirth. Each cycle wipes the slate clean, but the potential remains. The habit of forgetting may be the way the cosmos keeps itself young. When you think about it that way, eternity doesn't mean endless sameness. It means endless renewal. Time isn't a straight line, but a pulse, expansion and contraction, memory and forgetting, creation and dissolution. Each universe, each life, each civilization participates in that rhythm. The forgetting makes room for the remembering, and maybe that's why the idea of oblivion feels both terrifying and beautiful. It touches something deep in us, the recognition that we too are temporary expressions of an ongoing flow. We build monuments, write histories, create technologies, all in an effort to be remembered. But the universe reminds us that permanence was never the point. The point is participation, to exist for a while, to create, to experience, and then to return our energy to the system so that something else can arise. The universe's habit of forgetting is paradoxically what gives us meaning. Because we know our time is finite, we care about what we do. Because we know we'll be forgotten, we create. Our art, our science, our love, they're all ways of leaving imprints on the flow, brief signatures that will one day dissolve but not before they've shaped what comes after. So when you look at the night sky and think about how small we are, how short our lives are compared to the stars, remember that it's the same with everything. The stars too will fade, the galaxies too will disperse, the universe too will forget, and in that forgetting, it will begin again. We are the witnesses of that cycle, the momentary awareness that sees it for what it is. The universe forgets, but through us, for a brief moment, it remembers that it forgets. It sees its own impermanence reflected in the human desire to hold on. It feels itself through our longing, our wonder, our awe. We are not separate from its forgetting. We are its expression of it. And perhaps that's enough, to know that every thought, every breath, every moment of awareness is part of the universe's ongoing act of remembering and forgetting. To exist, even briefly, within that rhythm is to be part of something vast, ancient, and endlessly new. The forgetting will come, as it always does, but for now the memory of everything that has ever been is still here, glowing quietly in the starlight, waiting to fade into the next beginning. Somewhere in the flow of all this, between the remembering and the forgetting, between the rise and fall of civilizations, there's a lingering question that never really leaves us. What do we inherit when everything changes? What remains when even memory itself begins to dissolve? Not the structures, not the words, not the things that can be held. Those fade, as they always have. What endures is subtler, a kind of understanding that lives in the rhythm of things, passed forward not through matter, but through pattern. It's what the universe gives to itself each time it starts over. The last inheritance isn't physical, it's awareness. Every civilization, every being, every world that has ever existed contributes something to that awareness. A new way of perceiving, a new variation on thought, a new relationship with existence. These are not tangible gifts. They are the quiet adjustments that shape the next expression of life. Even after the names and symbols and languages are gone, the impressions remain, woven into the behaviour of matter, the instincts of organisms, the curiosity of minds. That's the true continuity, the inheritance that moves not through blood or culture, but through being itself. You can think of it like this. Every action leaves a trace, even when it's forgotten. Every idea changes the context in which the next one will appear. Civilization is not a chain of separate events, but a single unfolding, each layer resting on the one before it. We inherit not just what those before us created, but the conditions they made possible, their balance or imbalance, their wisdom or their neglect. All of it shapes the world we enter. Whether we know it or not, we are carrying the weight of countless choices that came before, some human, some planetary, some perhaps older than that. The idea of inheritance often makes us think of possession, something we receive, something we own. But in truth, the inheritance of existence is participation. We don't receive the world, we become part of its continuation. The air we breathe has been breathed before. The atoms in our bodies once belonged to stars, oceans, forests, and creatures we'll never know. The water in our veins has flowed through ancient rivers, fallen as rain on forgotten landscapes, cycled through 1,000 forms before finding us. That continuity is the last inheritance, the unbroken movement of life transforming itself endlessly. When you step back far enough, even the boundaries between past and future start to blur. There's no clear separation between what was and what will be. The inheritance moves in both directions. The choices we make now will shape not just what follows, but how the past itself is interpreted. The meaning of what came before is not fixed. It evolves as consciousness evolves. We're constantly rewriting the story we've inherited, giving new context to old events, new purpose to forgotten beginnings. In that way, inheritance is not passive. It's active, creative, ongoing. The same is true for the planet. Each cycle of destruction and renewal leaves behind information, not in words or symbols, but in the chemistry of the air, the composition of the soil, the diversity of life. The Earth remembers through adaptation. What survives each extinction carries forward the traits that allowed it to endure, shaping the next era. Even in the most devastating resets, the last inheritance remains. Resilience, encoded in DNA, waiting to express itself again when the time is right. We are part of that resilience, our ability to imagine, to reason, to care. These are not accidents. They are the outcomes of countless cycles of trial and error. Intelligence itself may be the ultimate inheritance of the universe. Its way of ensuring that, even as it forgets, there is always something to remember for a while. Consciousness doesn't stop the flow, it illuminates it briefly. It allows the universe to witness its own transformations before releasing them again. Perhaps that's why awareness feels both fleeting and infinite. It's not owned by us, it moves through us. The thoughts you have, the emotions you feel, the moments of connection that move you, they are not isolated experiences. They are echoes of the same awareness that has been arising again and again across time. You are the latest form it has taken, the newest way the universe has found to look at itself. That too is inheritance. If there were civilizations before us, if others have risen and fallen and vanished into silence, their legacy is not in ruins or artifacts, but in this, in the persistence of curiosity, in the drive to create, in the sense of wonder that keeps emerging in every form that can feel. We might not know their names or their stories, but we continue their impulse. The instinct to ask where we came from, to imagine what lies beyond, to search for meaning. Those are ancient. They are the signature of continuity written in the mind of every being that has ever become aware. Maybe that's what the universe intends, if it can be said to intend anything, to keep trying, to keep inventing new forms of awareness, each one remembering just enough to continue the story, but forgetting enough to begin again. The last inheritance is not memory, but possibility. The capacity for consciousness to reappear, to ask the same questions in new ways, to explore the same mysteries from different angles. It's humbling to realize that the future we imagine may already be part of a much longer process. The next civilizations, whoever or whatever they are, will inherit from us not our buildings or machines, but the conditions we create, the atmosphere, the chemistry, the balance of ecosystems, the fragments of data left drifting through space. They'll inherit the consequences of our choices and the essence of our curiosity. Our time will become their foundation, and they in turn will leave something for the next. When you trace this far enough, you begin to see a kind of cosmic generosity at work. Nothing is wasted. Every life contributes to the unfolding of the next. Every death enriches the soil of possibility. Even extinction feeds renewal. The stars that die seed the universe with the elements of new worlds. The civilizations that vanish leave behind the traces that inspire those to come. The process never ends. It only changes form. This is what makes the universe both forgetful and kind. It forgets details, but it remembers rhythm. It erases structures, but it preserves the pattern of becoming. What remains is not the individual, not the moment, but the movement, the ongoing flow of energy and awareness that has no beginning and no end. That's the inheritance we all share, the one that doesn't need to be protected because it can't be lost. It's strange to think that, in the end, we will give back everything we've ever received. The matter of our bodies, the energy of our thoughts, the imprint of our existence. It will all return to the same flow that gave rise to us. But perhaps that's the quiet beauty of it. Nothing truly belongs to anyone. It all belongs to the unfolding. The universe lends itself to us for a time, and then we return it, reshaped, refined, expanded in some small way. Maybe that's what wisdom really is. The recognition that we are temporary custodians of an eternal process, that our role is not to hold, but to tend, to add our small contribution to the continuity before letting go. We are the brief moment of awareness through which the universe renews its understanding of itself. That's our inheritance and our legacy. It might sound abstract, but you can feel it in the simplest moments. When you look at a sunset and sense something beyond words, that's the inheritance moving through you. When you hear music and feel time stretch, that's the rhythm of continuity speaking. When you fall asleep and dream, when you wake and wonder, those are the echoes of everything that came before, woven quietly into your experience. The inheritance isn't distant. It's right here, in the pulse of being alive. And if all of this ends one day, if our civilization, our species, even our planet eventually dissolves into the greater forgetting, then somewhere, in the far reaches of time, the pattern will return. Another world will form, another awareness will rise, and it will carry the memory of this one, faintly, indirectly, through the subtle influence of what we've become. The universe will have learned something through us, even if it can't say what. That's the last inheritance, not permanence, but contribution. The understanding that our existence, however brief, participates in the continuity of everything. We are the custodians of a moment in the story of time, entrusted with the awareness that has passed through countless forms before reaching us. Our task is not to preserve it unchanged, but to enrich it, to pass it forward in whatever form it can take. Some call it spirit, some call it consciousness, some simply call it life. Whatever name you give it, it's the same phenomenon. The quiet, endless cycle of remembering and forgetting that carries the universe forward. It flows through us, as it has through everything before, and when it leaves, it will not be gone. It will simply take another shape, another sound, another thought. In that sense, nothing is ever truly lost. Not the civilizations, not the stars, not even the smallest gesture of kindness or wonder. All of it becomes part of the pattern, folded into the fabric of what comes next. The universe doesn't archive our stories in stone or sky. It carries them in possibility. And that, in the end, is the gentlest kind of immortality. To know that everything we are continues quietly, as part of everything that will ever be. So when you close your eyes, when the noise fades and the thoughts slow, remember that you are part of that inheritance, a continuation of something ancient and infinite, here for a moment to see, to feel, to remember, and to let go. The universe is still moving, still creating, still forgetting and beginning again. And through you, through all of us, it's still learning what it means to be alive. That is what remains. That is what endures. The last inheritance is not what we keep, but what we become. The living memory of the universe carried quietly in the breath between its forgetting and its next awakening. You've made it through a long journey, through the silences of planets, through the memory of water, through the rise and fall of things that once were and may be again. Maybe you've been listening while drifting off to sleep, or maybe you've just been sitting in the quiet, letting your mind wander through the spaces between words. Either way, you're part of the story now. Everything you've heard tonight, the cycles, the forgetting, the renewal, it's not distant. It's in you. It's in your breath, your heartbeat, the slow rhythm of your thoughts as they begin to fade into rest. You are made of the same materials as every star that has ever lived, and every world that has ever turned in the dark. You are what the first civilizations left behind. You are what the next ones will inherit. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel that continuity, the soft pull of gravity that connects you to everything else. The atoms that form your skin were once part of oceans, part of forests, part of other lives. They'll move on again one day, finding new forms, new purposes. The awareness moving through you right now will do the same. Nothing is lost. It all just changes shape. That's the quiet truth of existence. The universe doesn't hold on. It moves, it breathes, it dreams. And you, right now, are one of its dreams. A moment of consciousness through which it remembers itself, so take a slow breath. Feel it fill your chest, then let it go. The same air has moved through everything that's ever lived. It's the oldest inheritance there is. Each breath is a small act of continuity, a quiet exchange with the cosmos. If you're listening in the dark, let your eyes rest. Let the last of your thoughts soften. The world outside can wait. The stars will keep shining, the oceans will keep turning, and the story will go on, with or without words. You don't need to hold on to any of it. You don't need to understand all of it. You just need to be here in this moment, breathing, listening, existing. The universe is still unfolding, and for a little while, it's unfolding through you. Thank you for being here, for spending this time in reflection. If you found something soothing in this, a thought, a feeling, a quiet, feel free to stay with it. Let it linger. Let it slow you down. And when you're ready, when sleep begins to reach for you, let it take over. Let the story fade into the hum of your own breath. Because everything, in the end, becomes part of that same rhythm. The remembering, the forgetting, the renewal. You're part of it. You always have been. You always will be. Good night, dear listener. Rest well. The story continues.